Bitcoin is not physical gold. You can kill Bitcoin. If Bitcoiners decide they want to be Ethereum, there's nothing to stop it. This is basically what Bitcoin Core said to us in 2025. We can't stop all Bitcoin spam, therefore we're going to do nothing about it. Reference implementation went rogue, and no one seems to want to do anything about this. Ported our life savings into it. Consensus flows from culture. Bitcoin is only as good as the Bitcoiners who run the software and enforce the consensus rules. It's the node runners who control the network. The miners, the large mining pools, are just the employees. They don't get to set the rules of the network.
What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Matthew Kratter runs Bitcoin University, a daily channel where, for the better part of a decade, he's been one of the most watched voices teaching Bitcoin and tearing down the FUD around it. Before Bitcoin, he did a PhD in literature at Berkeley, studied under the philosopher René Girard, and then spent years running global macro at Peter Thiel's hedge fund. Today, he has nearly everything he owns a Bitcoin, and he's become one of the loudest voices warning that Bitcoin is under attack from the inside. Matt, welcome to the Bitcoin Matrix, where critical thinkers...
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Cedric. I've been a big fan of your pod over the years, so it's really fun to talk to you like this.
Wow, I really appreciate that. I mean, you have a huge channel on YouTube, and you've been keeping a lot of people in tune every day for a long time. I kind of want to get into your background, though, a little bit about who you are. Maybe like you studied literature, I guess, at Berkeley. What were you thinking you were going to do with your life? How'd you end up at Berkeley studying literature?
Well, if you want, if you want
California?
If you want the definition of idealism, I guess it would be majoring in English and music, which is what I did as an undergrad at Stanford. So I was an undergrad at Stanford. I actually grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I was born in Colorado, grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I then came to California for college and attended Stanford, where I met my wife. And I majored in. I actually started off as a physics major. I was growing up. I was in high school. I was good at science and math as well, and I did all the APs. I did AP physics and AP calculus and stuff. And I was a big fan of people like Albert Einstein. I just thought it was really cool what he did at Princeton at the end of his life, and the kind of physics he did were just pencil and paper. But I discovered at Stanford that I was not Einstein, and studying physics was. So I did a year of physics. My first year, I did the physics track, actually with a guy named Stephen Chu, who became Professor Chu, who became Obama's energy secretary many years later. He was a great teacher. It's kind of sad he went into politics, but I was kind of a B student in physics, and there was a lot of labs and stuff. And I thought I wanted to do work on quantum and unified field theory and stuff that I was not mathematically prepared or intellectually prepared for. And then I was taking humanities classes on the side and just having a lot more fun with those. And it was a little more slower paced, and you could sit around and drink pints or drink coffee and have long philosophical discussions. And so I ended up just very, very idealistic in that way. And I assumed I was going to become a professor. I went to, after graduating from Stanford, I attended UC Berkeley, where I ended up getting a PhD in English literature, focused on 20th century, what we call literary modernism, kind of all the big guys like Ezra Pound and William Faulkner and James Joyce. And I always loved really difficult literature, like Finnegan's Wake. I was part of the Joyceans and also the Poundians. I hung out in Italy with some of the Pound people. And some of the Joyce people too. There's actually a funny story. I was in Rome once at in the summer in Rome, which is obviously very, very hot. And I was hanging out with it was a James Joyce conference, and obviously a lot of Irish people there. And I love the Irish. I've hung out with them obviously a lot. But so we found ourselves in an Irish pub. It was about 110 degrees outside Fahrenheit. And here we were in this pub that had the air conditioning blasting, and it had a roaring fire, and all the windows closed with curtains so we could be miserable as if we were in an Irish winter. But that's so I did a lot of basically. It's very strange because I've sort of come full circle, which the Bitcoiner crowd is a lot like the crowds I used to hang out with. Very interdisciplinary, very interesting people, weird, quirky people from all different backgrounds with fun things to say. I got interested. Berkeley was obviously, academics weren't really working on stuff that I was that interested in. I was much more sort of traditionalist and interested in a synthesis of different disciplines. So is there a way we can come up with a unified field theory for the humanities, or what the French called the human sciences, so psychology and anthropology and sociology. And this was something that was very popular in the late 19th century when Western civilization still believed in itself and was interested in trying to come up with the laws of human culture and sort of systematize everything. And then slowly the humanities were captured by post-structuralism and Marxism and post-colonialism and wokeism, et cetera. And I really saw the beginnings of that at UC Berkeley. As part of this, I was working with a Professor René Girard, which I think you mentioned him in the intro, who's was a brilliant cultural critic, French cultural critic, who was involved in the same things, sort of a synthesis of the humanities. And he eventually, near the end of his life, was inducted in the Académie Française. So very, very impressive guy, polymath, brilliant mind. And so he became a family friend. He came to my wedding. And I was highly involved with the Girardians, as we called ourselves, and attended a weekly seminar at Stanford. Girard sat on my dissertation committee, read my dissertation, and I attended these weekly seminars at Stanford. I would drive over from UC Berkeley once a week. And as part of that, I actually met Peter Thiel at those groups. He was very interested in René Girard as well. And we'd always go out for drinks afterwards. And that's how I got to know Peter. And I began to, I've told the story on other podcasts, but basically I had a Stanford reunion where I realized like all my friends were trading stocks and making money and stuff. And I was thinking about getting married at the time. And I'm like, wow, I'm going to need money because these really expensive houses in Palo Alto that are $200,000. Like, who could afford that in Palo Alto? Of course, those are like $5 or $6 million now. Once I started studying the markets and just reading everything I could and going into some of the early internet chat rooms and forums, trading forums, I got really obsessed with it. And so that was something else that Peter Thiel and I talked about in the late 90s, kind of at the end of the Girard seminar. And both Peter and I also gave sort of financial market paper. So the seminar, you'd always have someone present a paper every week, and then people would talk about it, and that'd be the basis for discussion. So Peter did some macro stuff. I did some, obviously, financial markets function. There's a crowd element to it, and this is something that René Girard was very interested in. And this is something that goes through the French cultural theorists. I think it was Le Bon wrote a book called The Crowd. There's Gustave Le Bon, maybe. There's this whole theory, and so I was applying Girardian theory to the stock market and talking about my experiences there. Long story short, I graduated, got my PhD. Or actually, I should rewind. I actually started trading in graduate school because I realized that this was the beginning of the online retail brokerage revolution. There was a company called Daytech that basically you could use the internet to log on and trade stocks. This was just my dad was interested in stocks, but he had like a special machine at his office, and he also would call the broker up. But the discount brokerages, here's a way I could pay $10 a trade and start to test out my theories. And so I got very into systems trading, sort of systematic rules-based trading. And I gradually lost interest in academia, as I saw that academia mainly consisted of professors presenting papers to each other and publishing them in scholarly journals. And really, like, only you'd write stuff and only 4 or 5 people would end up reading it. And it was just kind of this echo chamber, this academic echo chamber. And then all the postmodernism stuff, I was not interested in. I was interested in the pursuit of truth, et cetera. And then the job market was also very bad for academia. And this was in the late 90s, which is famously when the unemployment rate in the US in 98 or 99 was like, it was like 0%. Basically, anyone who wanted to work was employed back then. And so I realized I knew enough about economics to put one and one together and realize that if the academic job market was this difficult at the best time in American history for jobs, that this was going to be a very difficult thing. And so I sort of transitioned into just thinking about markets, and I finished up my dissertation as fast as I could, and just started full-time trading. I had some scholarship money. I got a Mellon grant. Don't tell the Mellon people this, but gave me $15,000, and I put that in my brokerage account and started trading with it. So this whole time I'm trading. Peter's running Thiel Macro, which was his early hedge fund. At a certain point, he took all the money out of Thiel Macro, or took a lot of it out, and it was a very small hedge fund, and he put it in a company called Confinity that later became PayPal. And then that company, I believe, that company merged with X.com, which was Elon Musk's company. That was the original X.com. And so it was really an amazing time hanging out. I'd go to the PayPal startup headquarters, and I'd go to some of their parties. And I never worked for PayPal or invested in it. I didn't have enough money. I tried to get my dad to invest in it, and he regrets to this day that there were $50,000 investments. They became $5 or $6 million at the time of the IPO. But I really learned a lot from Peter. We were trading notes, and he ended up selling PayPal in 2002. He sold it to eBay and decided to reboot his hedge fund, which was rebranded to Clarium Capital. And he hired all his friends, which was really cool for me because I was an unemployed English PhD. And we'd already nothing really changed. I just hung out with him a lot more. This time the offices were in San Francisco, and we just continued the dialogue. We had various silos at the hedge fund at first. So there was like the systems trading silo, and there's some other, basically it was almost like a family office. Peter started a restaurant that he was running out of there, and he had a guy who was working on a NASCAR magazine. He was just trying all these different business ideas. And then the core of it was a global macro strategy that was based on, the idea was sort of to recreate George Soros, because at this point, people had become much more interested in sort of long short portfolios and nothing very bold and directional and leveraged. And Peter liked the idea of, figuring out where the world is going, making concentrated leverage bets, and having very high returns. So we had an interesting fee structure. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, it was 0 and 25. Most hedge funds at the time were 2% management fee and 20% of the profits, 20% incentive. This one was set up such that we did not make any money unless we had good returns. So it was a 0% management fee. Peter was paying all the management costs, the office and salaries out of his own pocket. And then we were taking 25% of the of our gains at the end of the year. And so when I joined, it was basically just Peter's money, $50 million in his Roth IRA, famously. And when I left, we'd grown it to $2 billion. So it was very, very interesting to see who was around there. I got to know the Palantir guys who were some of them actually worked for me. 2 of them worked for me, in the office hierarchy, whatever that means. And I got to just meet very interesting people. I never met Elon, but Max Levchin. I worked very closely with I sat across from his girlfriend at the time, who became his wife. And so I got to know a lot of the sort of PayPal mafia people, even though I never worked for PayPal and was a part of that. And I got to watch Peter work through the ideas of, one day he started talking about network effects and how important they were in terms of social networks. And he had this idea that social networks would be the next stage of the internet, that they'd be very, we had email, we had web browsers and stuff, but he thought maybe people would want to socialize online and utilize a social graph. And so then he began to invest in companies, obviously like Facebook, and I think he basically invested in all of them at the time. Was it MySpace? And there were a couple others. And And I did not understand what he was talking about at the time in terms of social. Like, it's all very clear in retrospect. It's very transparent. And I remember that was also interesting. This was a very bearish time in Silicon Valley because we just had the dot-com crash. And the general sentiment was the internet was dead, that this was a bubble that had popped and it was never coming back. And I remember talking to Peter about it in 2002, saying, it's really sad that this is all done. And Peter's like, what are you talking about? He's like, this is the greatest time of opportunity in history. Like, the internet's not dead. This is just, we went back a few steps, but there's going to be just billions of dollars made. And, no one was talking that way in Silicon Valley at the time. It was just Peter. So he has this visionary quality to him. So that's basically how I transitioned from academia to working at a hedge fund. And it was a very interesting hedge fund experience as well, because he would organize meetings with Girard. We'd have just very interesting people come in. He'd invite Milton Friedman to come over to his house, and we'd all go there and hang out with Milton Friedman, and various. I'm trying to think who else. And Peter just was seeding all these people to do documentaries and books and research on longevity and even transhumanism at that early stage. And so it was a very dynamic intellectual time, and we were a very quirky group. Like the capital allocators didn't really know what to do with us because we were so different, and we were sort of, I won't say fly by night, but we were like Bitcoiners. We weren't wearing suits or anything. And Peter had a policy. Basically, he said, I'm not going to hire any MBAs. Don't like MBAs. They're just too much groupthink, and they're too much people pleasers. And also, it's interesting in light of he eventually came up with a scholarship, to pay people not to go to college. But I remember as we were growing, I was helping him hire people. And so we'd have stacks of resumes this big. And I asked him, like, what are we looking for? And he basically said, we'll go through them and throw out all the resumes that are not from people who didn't go to Stanford, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, whatever the short list was like that. Just throw the rest in the garbage, because we're just going to hire people from those places. And maybe there's groupthink there as well, but we might as well. At least they've shown. So that's kind of interesting to, in retrospect, thinking about his paying you not to go to college. There's always that contradiction then, because Peter's obviously a very successful academic and went to Stanford and went to Stanford Law School and tried to become clerk for a Supreme Court justice. And he did structured products, I believe, at Credit Suisse, if I remember correctly. And as part of that, he developed a real distrust of Wall Street desks, which I've inherited, because he used to be on the other side structuring, creating these complex option products for customers. And he basically told us, like, everything that these banks or the prime broker builds or these trading desks is you got to be really careful. And especially if they show you a trade idea and it looks like just a slam dunk and it looks like free money, it's always a trap. And so that's something I still have with me. This I think I learned this from Peter. This dislike of financial engineering. And so when people, I've lately been quite critical of the Bitcoin treasury companies, which we can talk about later if you're interested. But part of my critique of them goes back 20 years and seeing how Wall Street behaves, seeing what structured products look like, and just seeing how silly financial engineering is. There's a place for some of it, but a lot of the ideas that are infiltrating Bitcoin are just old Wall Street TradFi ideas that have been repackaged. And unfortunately, a lot of Bitcoiners think these are shiny new objects, whereas they're just traps. They're just traps. And if you've been around Wall Street long enough, and I guess I should explain something a lot of people don't understand who weren't in the business. In the hedge fund business, or at least back then, you had what's called the buy side, which are the hedge funds like us. And so we're kind of the customer, or the person who gets to decide, what we want. And then the sell side is the people who service us, the brokerage, the trading desk. And, they want to get a lot of our business and generate a lot of commissions. And then they come by. And I was still there at that point where there was still a lot of gift giving. This went away fairly quickly, but just like at Christmas time, just getting obscene, getting like 20 stakes from our prime broker and all these bribes basically. And you always wonder when you see presents like that, it's like, wow, we're really probably spending too much. They can give us, they never gave us cars or anything like Taylor Swift would have done. But so it's interesting having this context, and this is one reason I find Bitcoin so refreshing because it's very, very different. And crypto, and I think the Bitcoin treasury companies, they try to bring a lot of TradFi back in. They try to sneak it in through the back door. And I think it's a mistake because Bitcoin's a bearer asset. It's a very, very special asset. So that's how I transitioned from academia to working at a hedge fund, which was very strange. And I've always been very grateful to Peter for giving me that chance because I certainly did not have the background. I mean, I had the background in terms of being able to do good research and just work very independently, and that's served me well with my YouTube channel as well. But I didn't have the pedigree. I hadn't majored in. A lot of people I knew at Stanford majored in econ or I don't know, more quantitative math that they could use on Wall Street. But Peter was much more about the big ideas, the directional ideas. Where's the world going and what mispricings can we profit from? So, for example, we did a lot with crude oil at the time. Crude oil was priced very cheaply back then, and it was highly backwardated, and the distant months, the distant future, so delivery 12 months, 24 months, 36 months was very, very cheap. Crude oil was trading at like $15 or $20 out the curve for people who understand futures curve. And so there's some interesting trades where you could buy crude oil futures and you basically roll up the curve because it was in backwardation, and you can make money because basically if the price of crude oil on the markets, the spot markets, is $25 a barrel, and you buy the futures contract at $15 a barrel, eventually it will converge, assuming the spot price stays around 25. You'll basically ride up the curve. It's called riding up the curve, the backwardated curve. And that $15 will turn into $25 by the time you get close to delivery. So that's just to give you a flavor of, and then we had very big theses about how the world was going to unfold. And I think I've told this story on other pods, but my first day of work at Clarium in 2003, I walk into the conference room, everyone's there who's already been working there. And the topic of discussion is that housing is out of control, that the Fed is in the process of engineering a housing bubble to bail out the economy after the dot-com collapse, and that the real risk is that this is going to take down the U.S. banking system. It's going to blow up Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. This was literally the topic of discussion in 2003 on my first day there. And I didn't quite know what to make of it. I'm not sure I'd even heard of Fannie Mae at that point. But obviously, for those who know the story, this is what happened in 2008 and 2009. And we did get a global financial crisis, and the U.S. banking system basically blew up and had to be bailed out. And of course, this is the backdrop for Bitcoin. And this is, Chancellor on the brink of a second bailout that Satoshi put in the Genesis block. But Peter's always been ahead of the curve and is very good at seeing which way the world is trending. As part of that too, I got to talk on the phone with some of the big short guys, Michael Burry and his guys. Like I would talk on the phone with them. We were trading notes and stuff. We didn't end up actually putting together a trade with them, but this was sort of the context. So really, really interesting people.
That's amazing. I mean, there's so many more probably interesting people that you crossed paths with. We might have even crossed paths. I lived in San Francisco in 2003 and 2004. And I worked in, not every day, but my main headquarters was out of the Bank of America building.
555 California.
I know. I heard.
Yeah, that's where we were.
Yeah, which is a very famous building. Yeah. Well, I didn't go every day. I was a consultant, so I would go. I was with the Big Four, with Ernst & Young, now EY. So I would go to Adobe, Microsoft, sometimes travel. A lot of times I was down in San Jose or over in the East Bay for certain clients.
I think we were on the 43rd floor of Bank of America.
I don't remember. maybe 28, 29. I don't remember. And I only went there probably like 24 times, maybe 36 times over the 2 years I lived there, that particular building. But there, in terms of, I want to talk about culture and Peter Thiel. And so first with culture, I'd like to hear more about what you studied with René Girard around like maybe mimetic desire, scapegoating, and human culture. And we could start there. And then even with Peter Thiel, there's just so much, him, Sean Parker, at first, to me, or for a long time, seemed like sort of renegades, where they learned about the system and could kind of, do jujitsu on the system. And Peter Thiel, it's very few humans who are at the forefront. I mean, maybe we were seeing a few more unicorns, but very few people have multiple billion-dollar ideas or catch on at different waves more than once. Right. And Peter Thiel has been sort of at the forefront of all of them. And so I'm kind of curious what these seminars were like. Was this really like 9 or 10 people? Was this 100 people? Was this very formal? And obviously, I mean, but you got into the informal talking with him. You bring up certain movies. Like, it sounds like he ran the hedge fund. Like, you would see Michael Burry, sort of run his office and maybe tossing around ideas and talking about philosophy and talking to the world's greatest minds. And people dream about this life. And even sort of maybe, getting all their money into a Roth. I don't know how he got all of it into the Roth IRA.
I believe he did a minimum, whatever the contribution was, $2,000 or $3,000 a year in the late 90s. And then he invested in PayPal via the Roth instrument, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, that's what was very unique probably at the time. And maybe he was at the forefront of, and he spoke about a lot of things. He was against sort of, kids going to college.
That was much later. That was like 2010 or 2012 or so.
That was,
but yeah.
Yeah, but Vitalik came out of that, right? And he took on Sean Parker as a partner, I think, a founders fund, right? And that Sean Parker, I mean, famously with Napster, which I thought was the coolest thing in the world when I was 17, 18 years old, and I was downloading every MP3 I could get my hands on. And the idea of these guys were not just renegades and financial engineering geniuses, like the way he got the money into the Roth and used the system against it, but they were technologists, sort of dreaming up how it would go or investing in.
They were also interested in, obviously, a lot of people know this now, but the tagline or the motto for PayPal in the early years was "New World Currency," and that's really what they wanted to do, was create something that would replace the U.S. dollar, and that was, it's crazy to think of that in the late 90s or 2000s.
Yeah, and then they've been blessed. They went on to become the PayPal mafia and do sort of LinkedIn, Facebook, or invest in all these things. Everything that's sort of centralized. Palantir. I mean, everything that's sort of the antithesis of a lot of these kernels of ideas. And
that's the central contradiction. And
weird art.
Yeah, I mean, Peter certainly was a very staunch, serious libertarian in the late 90s. I mean, he could wear the conservative hat or the right libertarian hat, and he founded the Stanford Review, which was kind of the conservative newspaper at Stanford. And he was always a contrarian, so it was kind of a left-wing campus, and then so he would piss people off by being super Republican or whatever. But it was, I think his real passion was for the books he was reading were like Ayn Rand, obviously, and he loved Tolkien. Obviously, he's named a lot of the name Palantir, and a bunch of his companies come from Tolkien's novels. So there's this progression from, I think if you're a successful entrepreneur, you figure out at a certain point that you kind of go up the scale and you have various exits and you make certain amounts of money. But at a certain point, it's the guys with the printing press who are the best customers, and those are the governments and their accompanying central banks. And so Peter and his VC friends began to figure out, certainly Elon figured this out very early with the carbon credits for Tesla, et cetera, figured out that getting the government as your customer, government doesn't care what it pays for stuff. It has a money printer. and you can. And so this is, I think this may, because obviously Peter's not. It's like, how do you square this circle? Creating this global, this horrendous company called Palantir, which I was an early investor in. Back when it was started, it was started the way I was sold on it. Basically, I did some consulting work for them, so I didn't get a huge number of shares. I wasn't a founder or anything, but I went to Palantir very early. I went to their first headquarters. I would hang out there quite a bit after work because I lived on the peninsula. I worked in San Francisco, and they were on Page Mill, down by Stanford. And I remember I got to play around with their early software, which was really cool. Just doing searches and stuff. I don't know if it was. I assume it was like real names and real data back then, which is kind of creepy to think about. But their idea was, at least the surface idea, because they were co-funded by the CIA, by InQtel, which is the VC arm of the CIA. And for some reason, I was sort of a Republican normie back then, and it didn't. I remember being puzzled in the '90s when people told me, I tell them I like George Bush Sr., and they're like, he used to head the CIA, and I was like, oh, that's great, or whatever. But the CIA was an investor in Palantir, and I remember going to their offices on Page Mill, and they had a big map on the as you walked in, kind of a whiteboard or a chalkboard at the time, and they'd mapped out all the different government agencies. So this was about 2004, I would say, and I was just blown away by how big the U.S. federal government was and how many shadow agencies, and they were trying to figure it out on their own, so they know who to sell their software to. And but their selling point was basically Palantir could have stopped September 11th, and I guess I certainly wasn't a 9/11. I sort of accepted the story at face value back then. But the idea was that if different government data, the CIA wasn't talking to the FBI, wasn't talking to the whatever, that if those government databases if you'd been able to do searches and have the different agencies talk to each other, we could have somehow prevented September 11th, which it seems sort of absurd looking back on it, because obviously September 11th is a very complicated thing, and we've never really gotten the true story, and there are a lot of interesting theories. But George Soros was an investor in Palantir, original investor, or his fund, and InQtel, et cetera. And so then, it's a very different world right now. I saw basically to close the loop on Palantir, I sold my shares at the IPO in 2021. I think they went public at the end of 2020, if I remember. Then there's a 6 month lockup, and as soon as I was unlocked, I sold. At that time, I got into Bitcoin in late 2019. So when I finally had liquidity, I sold all of it. I was not a fan of the company at that point, and I put all those proceeds into Bitcoin, and it's kind of funny because I think Bitcoin was probably around the same price it is now, which is ironic. If I had held Palantir, it just was like I knew it was going to continue to do well because they had basically succeeded, and they had the backings of very powerful and shady things going on. But at that point, I was really no longer a Republican normie that thought Palantir was there to stop the next 9/11 and wanted to get out and put it into Bitcoin.
It was funny when you were talking earlier about sort of being a literature student and going to the reunion and seeing everyone. I flashed the movie Good Will Hunting when Robin Williams was back to the Harvard reunion, and everyone's.
I was there. I was there. They're mopping the floors as the janitor, as the grad student.
Well, I mean, they're looking around you. The Bay Area is a weird place. I lived there for a couple of years, and you could be an accountant at a Big Four accounting firm making decent money, and the kid next door, who's your age, I'm not saying kid in a derogatory, the person next door was an administrative assistant at Salesforce and is sitting on $4 million in stock options. And they're like, hey, why don't you be like me and quit your, safe, stable accounting job and go work at some random startup, anything you could do and make it rich like me. It's a weird
I knew a couple like that who were, we were my wife and I and our young kids were at a summer camp with them. I think it was a Stanford summer camp. and they seemed this couple. They were fairly young, and they had young kids like we did. And I remember my wife was gonna. There's some T-shirts you could buy at the end or something, and the woman was, and this couple, they look like starving grad students. You know, you didn't think they had any money. And my wife was sort of surprised because these T-shirts were like $30 or something, or 20. They were kind of expensive. And the lady just kind of handed a check or just gave my wife a wad of cash and said, just get us some. And we're kind of like, that's weird. But then we found out she had worked as a, I think she'd like been a massage therapist or something. She had done something over the summer at Google, and she was smart enough to say, don't pay me in money, pay me in stock options. But they were worth, this was probably 2004. That couple was worth like $20 million right after Google had IPO'd. And so you're right. There is a lot of like just crazy money that you just never know. And you might see some kid and you realize like he's a billionaire. And I remember seeing Zuck at Stanford, speaking at Stanford in 2004. And, he was very young at that point. And there's this huge crowd he spoke at Treseder Union, which is this kind of the student hangout place. And I couldn't understand like why everyone was so excited about this little nerd. And, but yeah, that was obviously when Facebook had already launched. And I think it was a year or so later that Yahoo, it was 2005 or 2006, that Yahoo offered to buy them for $1 billion. The famous story that Peter tells, and Zuck says basically, well, it'd be fun to sell them, but what would I do with the money? I'd want to buy another social network to work on, so I might as well just keep working on Facebook because I enjoy working on this stuff. But yeah, cross paths with a lot of people, but I wasn't smart enough somehow to, if I'd worked on the founders fund side of things, a lot of those guys became billionaires. They made a heck of a lot of money. But I was on the hedge fund side of things, which was good. I'm very grateful for it, but it wasn't the crazy like Facebook money.
Yeah, I mean, those were wild times, and there was a period of time I think in San Francisco where people were paying like 12 months rent up front. Housing was in a real crunch. There was just, yeah, and then, but I think a lot about how I don't necessarily believe a lot of founder stories. I think there's a non-zero chance they're like sort of vehicles for the government to kind of demonstrate a private-public partnership that they can control through, which is being sort of a major shareholder in one of these huge companies, these unicorns, is very powerful.
I think Whitney Webb's done some work on. She's so prolific. I haven't followed all of it, but I remember seeing stuff from her about that Facebook was a DARPA project or something, that a lot of these companies had sort of deep state roots. Yeah. And in retrospect, that seems quite plausible. Like you never know for sure, but it's these companies eventually, they either start off as deep state projects, or when they get big enough and powerful enough, they get absorbed into the blob. They sort of have to be, or they were part of the blob to begin with.
Yeah, even Sean Parker, there's the wrinkle where, I thought he was the coolest kid in the world doing Napster. And then, but you find out before that, and I probably knew it, I just didn't connect dots, but he was raided by the FBI.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so the odds that, you kind of get raided by the FBI and not cut a deal maybe, or just not.
Did they say why they do we know why they raided him?
He hacked some, I think, bank, or I shouldn't say bank. Yeah. He did some hacking. The stories, the FBI showed up, and so maybe that's real. And they're like, "Well, we got a really talented kid here," and they hand him over to the CIA, or the NSA, or that wasn't real, and they need a story to kind of whatever.
I met Sean a couple times. I had dinner with him a couple times. He, there were some mutual friends who were working on this seasteading project, which is this idea of starting a new country out in the middle of the ocean, where it's outside of different jurisdictions. With the guy who's spearheading that was actually Milton Friedman's grandson, a guy named Patry Friedman. And I think Sean was involved with that because I met him briefly. I wasn't friends with him or anything.
I crossed paths with him briefly. He invested in a small independent documentary I worked on. So I got to see him at the premiere. He seemed like a nervous, just his energy was just incredibly nerve-wracking. He was just twitching everywhere, it seemed to me. Yeah, or just just very just anxiety ridden or something. It just, maybe he didn't want to be there. I have no idea. And he wasn't there, but we got to go to his house.
Was that San Francisco?
Which was epic. No, in New York City on like 10th Street. his $20 million mansion with, I mean, it's just,
Amazing.
his house was crazy. But, so I wonder, if like Peter Thiel to me seemed like someone who wasn't like a real true, maybe self-made person. But it's hard for me to think now that he's not captured. And it's hard for me to not think that he didn't see this coming in some way. You paint it, and I believe it, because I hear Elon Musk talk. I'm not that impressed, intellectually at least. I haven't heard him say things that really, same thing with Zuckerberg. They'll maybe say things about their business or their experience of what they do. But Peter Thiel I found fascinating from the very beginning with the Roth IRA move, the way he went out, did his own money, and the things he invested in. But now he's just been, crypto from both angles within the Bitcoin system. I don't like what he's kind of affiliated with. So either he knows what's coming or someone tells him what's coming. Or maybe he's he saw the government as the biggest customer in the world and wanted to be the biggest provider of something.
I think part of it too is he's had so much money for a while that he really does, he can almost invest in everything. Like I've talked to some small Bitcoin companies that I won't name, and the founder will tell me, oh, Peter invested $500,000 in this one. So you can kind of, and that's Peter can offer a lot of good business advice, and just being able to say that he's an investor. I mean, maybe it flips at a certain point where it's like, I mean, this guy told me this off the record. He didn't tell me on the record. But yeah, I don't. Peter was very good to me, so I don't want to. I don't want to cast shade in any way, but certainly the projects he's involved with lately, and just seeing the digital prison come down the road, you can almost taste it happening with Palantir and pre-crime, and there's some speculation. I don't know if this is true. I haven't spoken to Peter in over 2 years, I should also say. And for all the haters, I should also say I haven't been on his payroll since 2006. And so if I'm a Thiel plant, I spent years attacking Ethereum, which was a Peter Thiel project. My latest crusade has been against these Bitcoin spam companies, or Bitcoin companies that abuse the chain, like Shitria, which I call Shitria, which is Founders Fund is invested in them, which is a Peter project. It's actually very strange because I was more of kind of Republican normie when Peter was a libertarian, and I've become more libertarian over the years. And I don't know, Peter's just a bundle of contradictions. Devout Christian who's obviously an open homosexual. He's a complex person, and he's clearly on the spectrum, like a lot of people in Bitcoin. And I've never been able to square the circle with him or reconcile like what makes him tick, or what he's driven by. The one thing I do know is he's quite brilliant, and I saw that even before he was rich and famous, that he just had this incredible mind. And I think that's one reason both he and I, were attracted to René Girard and wanted to hang out with him, because René Girard had a beautiful mind as well, and basically. That was someone that if there's a guy who Peter Thiel thinks is smart and wants to hang out with, and Peter was very good to René Girard by the end of his life. He was, I think he gave him $1 million a year just to like play with. So René could, fly students over from France, or I don't think Girard really knew what to do with the money, because he was an academic and he had a nice house on the Stanford campus, but he wasn't interested in. But I do remember when Peter flew Girard to Paris when he got inducted into the Académie Française, and they flew him. Peter flew Girard and attended in his private jet, whenever that was, 2005 maybe, I can't remember.
It's a really cool thing when you get to be a benefactor to your elders or to the people.
Yeah, it was a very beautiful thing, and I know Girard appreciated the gesture. I'm not sure I answered your question about Girard in retrospect, but
I think of, though, so a lot of people think freedom, financial freedom, would come with money. And then I think, I don't know. So do you think, it's a two-part question. Do you think someone like Peter Thiel is financially free, sovereign, is sort of free from government interference if they want to say no?
I won't make this about Peter. I'll just speak in generalities, but
yeah.
I think at a certain, well, just at a let's look at it at a practical level. At a practical level, when you achieve a certain amount of wealth, you become a target, you become a political target. You know, politicians love to run saying, you know, why does this guy have so much money? And you also, depending what country you're in, you could obviously, you know, like what happened in Russia in the early 2000s, you could actually end up getting killed if you're one of the oligarchs. And so I think there's always that tension. There's also this tension that a lot of these people, they have tremendous wealth, but it comes with a lot of counterparty risk. It's usually very large. Like I guess Musk, people are saying he's a trillionaire now after the SpaceX IPO, but you know, most billionaires and now a trillionaire they're obviously not holding cash because they know it's a melting ice cube. They have huge stock portfolios and they have a lot of, you know, founder stock, and they can't really, they can borrow against it. They can try to sell it, but you know, they're often very big, or they own Class B shares, like people like Zuckerberg, or Michael Saylor has his own Class B shares. And so are you really free? Are you really free when your company is dependent on government contracts? Are you really free when billions of dollars of your wealth are sitting in accounts on Wall Street? Obviously, they can brokerage accounts, bank accounts can be frozen. This is, you know, the wonderful thing about Bitcoin. And so it's and then it becomes more complicated when I think billionaires enter politics in part to sort of hedge and protect themselves. So obviously Peter Thiel funded JD Vance, but even getting into politics itself can be a dangerous game, because if you pick the wrong horse, you can end up. And so that was another thing. Peter was very early on the Trump train in 2015, 2016, and really he alienated so many people in Silicon Valley. And then of course, all those people were like on the Trump team in 2024. It's kind of interesting to see. So it's a complicated game. I think I don't envy public billionaires. I'll tell you that. I think I see these videos of Peter online where occasionally they pop up in my X feed where he's, you know, walking down the street in New York City and people are attacking him and cursing him. And, you know, he's trying to walk as fast as possible and the cameras are following him. This is, I guess, comes with all forms of celebrity, because, you know, if you're an actress or a rock star or something, you have the same problem. But it's, you know, there's this old saying talking about kings and rich people. I don't know if it's like a toilet metaphor or something, but it's like, or a throne metaphor, that no matter how high you sit up, or no matter how high you're seated, you're still sitting on your ass. And so it's, you know, I've known a few billionaires and spent quite a bit of time with them, and you know, they have health problems and they have back pain, and they get in fights with their family or friends, and you know, they're just like you and me. They're human, and then of course they're subject to various risks. You know, people want to attack them or kidnap them or do horrible things, or political attacks. So I think if you're going to be a billionaire, it's probably better to be a more of a private billionaire. I think we have some in the U.S. You know these rich families, but you never kind of hear from the people, and they're usually second or third generation billionaires, but they stay pretty quiet and you don't even know what they look like. That's probably wiser. But if you want to accomplish things, you got to be like Peter. You got to put yourself out there and be the face, and keep pounding the pavement. And that's one thing about Peter, just an incredibly hard worker. You know, most people, if they made their first $50 million, would take some time off, but he's a tremendously hard worker. And I always laugh when people, people like AOC say, you know, it's like easy to become a billionaire, or you didn't deserve it, or you didn't earn it or something. It's like these people are pulling all-nighters and flying around the world. You know, they're flying on private jets, but you know, it's still, they still have to pound the pavement and deal with a lot of things. So I'll say that about Peter, that he worked his ass off. Whenever I saw him, he was always going 120%, just incredible energy and brilliance.
Yeah, it definitely seems super smart. What can we talk? I want to talk about culture and how it's upstream of consensus, and what does that mean?
So this is in the, I assume, in the Bitcoin context, so basically
Let's start from, it could be not the Bitcoin context, and we can then move it there.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of a saying that I've been putting out in the last 6 months or so, as a way of talking about consensus rules in Bitcoin. And I think my background has made me has sort of given me that perspective, just being involved in cultural theory and thinking about the impact of culture. And a lot of I think this is something that people who are more computer science may miss. Some of the Bitcoin core devs, for example, they don't have the same understanding of culture, and they think that you can somehow create the perfect, if you create the perfect software or the perfect cryptographic functions, that you can have the perfect money. But Bitcoin is so interesting because it's software, it's these technical things, but it's also social consensus. And we have this word consensus that's used in so many ways. There's a technical meaning of it in Bitcoin, which is the rules that are enforced by the Bitcoin protocol and that apply to what ends up in mined blocks. So it's a consensus rule that, for example, we get the halving, the halving of the block reward or the block subsidy every 4 years in Bitcoin, or every certain number of blocks. And that's one of the things that ensures the 21 million cap. And that's a consensus rule that is, it's a technical software rule, but it's also interesting because it is a way of sort of artificially enforcing scarcity and trying to create a scarce digital commodity, kind of on the model of something like gold. So it's got an issuance. Bitcoin has an issuance that's an issuance per block that's asymptotically approaching zero over time. And then at a certain point, the transaction fees obviously need to take over. But I think a lot of people in the Bitcoin community they don't value culture as highly as they should. And I want to be really clear. I think people have misunderstood it, because obviously you say Bitcoin culture. I'm not assuming that Bitcoin culture is homogeneous or anything like this. And it's also, it's not a code word for like white libertarian men who eat meat, though there's certainly a lot of us in Bitcoin like that, or INTJs who create, or as Gloria Zal, the Bitcoin Core former maintainer, said, toxic, nutty, carnivore, Bitcoin maximalist, or whatever she said. But what I mean by Bitcoin culture, we obviously have a lot of that, and Bitcoin is for everyone. I should just emphasize that it's for people from all tribes and races and countries and backgrounds and economic levels and gender and all those things. What I mean by Bitcoin culture is sort of the tradition that has been handed down from the early days. And this is I almost think of it in religious terms, where in a lot of religions you have a revelation, and then there's not it can be a mistake to have innovation on top of that. And so whether it's Christ or Buddha or Muhammad or whoever, like the golden rule or various things like, thou shalt not murder, these things, they're kind of handed down. And if you disagree with a lot of them, you probably don't want to be part of that religion. But like, if you're going to reform stuff and say like murder is okay and it's a Christian thing, or, obviously we could talk about different forms of murder. So culture, what I mean by Bitcoin culture is this tradition handed down. And I often get this accusation, like, Matt, why are you telling people how to use their Bitcoin? Who are you to tell people? And the answer to that is I'm nobody, and I don't tell people what to do with their money. But what I do try to do is pass down the tradition that I've learned from Bitcoin OGs and from reading the Bitcoin Talk forum and sort of understanding the evolution of Bitcoin history. So I made a video about this. I can't remember all the talking points in it about Bitcoin culture, but there are a couple of things. One of them is that we respect the blockchain, and we try to minimize our on-chain footprint with Bitcoin, because the blockchain is forever. Those of us who think Bitcoin is going to succeed think it's going to be around for 1,000 years. This is the millennial dream, and because of that, the Bitcoin blockchain is really just the history of all the transactions on the ledger since 2009. And so when we interact with the ledger, we should do it in such a way. When we interact with the blockchain, we shouldn't put a lot of garbage on there that some family is going to have to download 100 years from now. So this is an example of what I mean by Bitcoin culture. It doesn't mean what people would normally think, but basically the kind of traditions where we Bitcoiners value truth, and we value private property rights, which Bitcoin does a great job of enforcing. We minimize our on-chain footprint. We verify instead of trusting. We don't put people on pedestals. We don't trust the experts in Bitcoin. And if someone's been in Bitcoin and they're an OG and they're a prominent Bitcoin celebrity, we are fine, and we accept the fact that they can certainly be wrong about things. And so this is what's wonderful about you go on Bitcoin Twitter, Bitcoin X, and you see plebs interacting with Bitcoin OGs or billionaires like Saylor or Adam Back, and just saying, you're wrong about this. So this is what I mean by Bitcoin culture. This kind of, you could probably go on and add to this, but it's a certain, I guess it does have sort of libertarian anarcho-capitalist roots in a sense, but it's carrying on Satoshi's tradition. We're obviously against authoritarianism and central bankers, and we're against seigniorage, where we think it's immoral and unethical for people to be able to print up their own money. The U.S. government can print up a $100 bill for a couple pennies and then spend it. Obviously, there's a digital version, but spend it. So that's what seigniorage is, where you can actually make money printing money. And so this is why we don't like shit coins, because they have pre-mines and they're centralized and they're controlled, and they're kind of schemes to enrich a small group of insiders. And they end up looking more like securities as a result of this. So that's what I mean by Bitcoin culture. And this is, I think it's important for people to realize that the consensus rules. So basically, Bitcoin is a network, and it's an asset, and the asset is moved across the network. The asset is secured by the network, secured by the miners. It's secured by public key cryptography. No one can take your money unless they know your private key. And this is, one way we enforce private property, and we make sure Bitcoin's secure and it's censorship resistant. But what a lot of people don't realize is it's not this, and I'm guilty of this myself. I think in my first few years in Bitcoin, some of the videos I made sort of attributed magical properties to Bitcoin, as if it's this, calling it digital gold is a great metaphor. And I don't know if Saylor brought that in. I can't really remember, but whoever did, it's a great way of explaining Bitcoin to newcomers. But there's also problems with metaphors. So gold has its certain atomic structure, and it sort of comes with the universe and was created in supernovas or whatever, and it doesn't really need. It's enforced by its properties of money, or sort of enforced by the way it's distributed all around the world, and it's sort of short in supply, though obviously if you look out in the solar system and the universe, there's a lot of gold. But Bitcoin is very different, and people sometimes forget that Bitcoin is made up of Bitcoiners who run nodes, which is what the Bitcoin network is. It's just people like you and me running Bitcoin nodes on our laptops or desktops or personal servers and enforcing the rules. And this is what gives Bitcoin its decentralization, that we don't have the banker at Wells Fargo keeping track of our spending. Every node builds its own version of the blockchain, and through Nakamoto consensus, we all can converge to the same transaction history. And the chain is immutable. It's very, very difficult, or it's impossible to rewrite past a certain point. And this is another part of Bitcoin culture, which we can talk about, that we don't go into the blockchain history and make manual interventions. For example, like Vitalik did at the DAO hack in 2016, whenever that was, 2016, 2017, where he went back and basically changed the blockchain. Because if you go in and if you modify the blockchain manually and you go back in history and hard code a block, you basically turn Bitcoin into a trusted solution forever. And this relates to the discussion of Bitcoin spam, which we can get into if you want, and this risk because of Bitcoin Core's recent actions that the very bad things could end up in the blockchain. For example, child sexual abuse material, CSAM. This is one of the concerns. And Bitcoin is very different because it's immutable, and we want it to be that way. And so it's important to prevent these things from getting into the chain, because once they're in the chain, future people need to either download that CSAM when they spin up a node, which is just horrendous, or you have to go in and do a manual intervention, which then turns the Bitcoin blockchain into this trusted blockchain. Because if once you intervene once, you could always go back and, how do you know someone's not going to intervene in the future? Bitcoiners won't decide to intervene in the future and basically take your transaction out of the blockchain. And for example, if someone sent you Bitcoin in 2018, and for some reason there's a change and people decide to manually change that block, maybe you're still hodling that Bitcoin. But if they change that block, obviously they'd have to change all the blocks afterwards. So there's a theoretical piece to this. But if they change that, you won't have Bitcoin anymore, because the history will have been erased and no one sent you Bitcoin. And there's certain, each block contains a hash of the previous block. So if you change one block, you have to go through and change all the subsequent blocks as well. So it gets a little technically complicated, but Satoshi designed it in such a way that the history stays immutable, which I think is very important. And so it's important to protect the chain. If you end up with, heaven forbid, CSAM on your personal computer, and you obviously didn't intend to put it there, you can delete it, but you can't delete stuff from the Bitcoin blockchain. And so this has been one of the attack vectors that the Bitcoin Core devs, which used to be the major node software, this is the attack vector they opened up last year as part of the for people who've been following the whole opportune wars and the spam wars and all this stuff. I think I'm sort of rambling at this point. So.
No, it's great. As you're getting to all the things I want to, and I think we even have to go back a little further. I want to talk about why spam is actually a problem. And there's two types of spam, I guess. If we could agree something is spam, there's spam, I don't like it, and then there's spam, this is CSAM or something that's just egregious, right? And maybe if you don't agree on both buckets, but the two buckets exist, and we can talk about it as just why is spam bad, the big bucket of just spam. And I think about it a little bit growing up, whenever we got in a pool with a bunch of kids, it was like, hey, especially if you owned a pool or a pop-up pool or above ground or an in-ground pool or went to the public pool, please don't pee in the pool. No one pee in the pool. But inevitably, 4 hours later, over ice cream or pizza or candy, some conversation, someone would admit to peeing in the pool. And you're just kind of like, oh, that's gross. I wish you didn't tell me that now that I've lived through it, but just don't do that again. And inevitably, someone always pees in the pool. Someone's like, I don't feel like getting out and doing the hard work of going to the bathroom myself. And, and you look at public pools differently. So why is spam actually a problem? And I don't know if maybe we got to start with the op return wars.
So I think I like the example you used of peeing in the pool, because it's a good way of demonstrating what antisocial behavior looks like. Now, kids are kids. Maybe depending on the age, we don't really blame little kids. Can't really understand this, but at a certain age, you understand that it's antisocial. It's just bad behavior too. It's good for you to pee in the pool. You get immediate relief, but it's bad for everyone else. And you begin to understand I think the technical word for this is tragedy of the commons, where if everyone does this, then the pool is sort of ruined. And the classic thing in English history is the overgrazing of a piece of public land. And it makes rational economic sense for you to put your sheep on there and eat the grass. But if everyone does it and then all the plants get ripped up or whatever, then you've had a tragedy of the commons. And so the Bitcoin blockchain, that's one way of seeing it, as this commons that needs to be protected. And there may be people who profit from putting spam on it. One form of spam would be, for example, Bitcoin NFTs, which we call inscriptions, putting JPEGs online. And you can, there have been various waves of Bitcoin NFTs or inscriptions. You can make the person who puts them on there and then sells them to other people. that they can make a lot of money from it, but then everyone else has to store that for the rest of eternity. So this is how spam works. So basically, spam is a problem with all online systems, and we all have encountered it with our email inbox and voicemails and telemarketer calls. And so the difference is one difference is that email has certainly become very centralized, even though it didn't start off that way. But Google can put in various filters, various email filters, and it's very helpful. And one of the things we don't do is we don't. So for example, if Google came.
Firefish is non-custodial Bitcoin-backed lending. That means when you borrow against your stack, your keys stay in multi-sig the whole time. You're not handing your Bitcoin to a custodian. You're not trusting a counterparty. You're not waking up to bankruptcy news. It's just collateralized Bitcoin lending the way self-custodians built it. Firefish.io, code matrix. Your seed phrase is the most consequential sentence you'll ever own. And writing it on paper is the weakest place to put it. Stampseed is a titanium DIY kit that lets you hammer those words into solid metal. Fire resistant, waterproof, crush proof. 20 years from now, that piece of metal will still be there. Stampseed.com, code matrix gets you 15% off. Club Orange is the location-based social network built for the Bitcoin community. You open the app, see who's near you, what meetups are happening, which merchants in your city actually accept Bitcoin. If you've ever wanted to meet the people behind the orange-pilled accounts you follow, this app is your map. Download Club Orange today in the App Store or Google Play.
To us and said, we're going to stop using email filters because we can't stop all the spam. We would think they were absolutely crazy. And we would be like, well, just try to stop some of it, try to rate limit it, try to mitigate it. It doesn't have to be perfect. We don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And this is a good analogy. This is basically what Bitcoin Core said to us in 2025, or really 2023 to 2025. We can't stop all Bitcoin spam, therefore we're going to do nothing about it. And when you think of the email context, you realize how silly this is. But basically, the Bitcoin spam question goes back to the even Satoshi's days. And there's a famous discussion in Bitcoin Talk where Satoshi was speaking with Gavin Andreessen, and Gavin said, "My evil." And the interesting thing about Gavin is he paid a visit to the CIA very early on in Bitcoin history, and Satoshi disappeared very shortly thereafter, which leads you to, it makes you realize that the CIA has been aware of Bitcoin since the very beginning. But Gavin Andreessen had this famous quote where he said, "My evil little mind imagines, we could embed some data in Bitcoin. We could put a Lady Gaga video and split it up, etc." And Satoshi's response to this is, obviously this is a bad thing. Satoshi understood what Bitcoin spam was. He didn't say to Gavin, "How do we really know what the Bitcoin blockchain is for? Maybe it's an agnostic arbitrary data storage platform. And who am I to tell you not to put Lady Gaga videos on there and to force you to use it as money?" No, Gavin and Satoshi both understood that this was spam. And so this has been a problem since 2010. And this really came to a head the first time in 2013, 2014, when people began to abuse the blockchain. There was Eric Voorhees had a project called Satoshi Dice, where you could it was like a casino built on the blockchain itself. And I forget exactly how it worked, but it created a lot of dust outputs, these very small amounts of unspendable Bitcoin, and bloated the UTXO set. And then people needed to hold those when they ran nodes. And so there are a number of projects being built on top of Bitcoin that were sort of non-monetary. They were doing things like Counterparty, Omni, and some of these were monetary or borderline monetary. You can debate whether putting a casino on Bitcoin is monetary, and people play these word games. But obviously, I think the question you always have to ask when people do stuff with Bitcoin, or when you want to make a change to Bitcoin, is, does it make it better money or worse money? And I would argue that having a casino built into Bitcoin makes it worse money. and creates all this on-chain activity that we don't really need. And so people have understood what spam was since the beginning, but we had a much better group of Bitcoin core devs, again, the ones who make the node software, back in 2013 and 2014. And they showed real hostility to this arbitrary data or non-monetary data on Bitcoin. And they decided to fight spam. And they basically, the way they did it is they first of all, they just displayed hostility to it, which is very important. So if you don't want something, if you want less crime, for example, you should tell people that crime is bad and you should be tough on crime, even though you can't stop all crime. But just having that facade, having that front, having that attitude really helps. And so this is what Bitcoin Core basically was saying, and people like Greg Maxwell, who's sort of done a 180 on Bitcoin spam, were saying that this is abuse of the blockchain, and we need to stop people from doing this. And so the solution at that point was to create a small space. They basically repurposed an opcode called opreturn. And what opreturn does is it basically, when your computer sees that, or when the node sees it, it doesn't execute any function. And so it's basically you do opreturn, and then there's a place there you can put some arbitrary data into a Bitcoin transaction. And it started off at 40 bytes, which is obviously a very small amount of data. Then it was raised to 80 bytes. I think there's a debate about putting it back to 40 bytes, but it's essentially been at 40 to 80 bytes since 2013, 2014. And this upset someone named, who we talked about earlier in this conversation, someone named Vitalik Buterin, who wanted to build his scam coin, his scam casino on top of Bitcoin. And he actually says this in a tweet, which you can find on X, and I've referenced in my videos. He basically tells the history of Ethereum, saying, I wanted to build Ethereum on Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin core devs' hostility to storing arbitrary data on chain basically drove me away, because I was afraid they would just keep attacking me. And so I decided to just build my own. I think he first tried to build it on a different blockchain, but then he eventually created Ethereum, which I like to call an idiot container. And it was great, because all the people who didn't really understand Bitcoin and all the devs who wanted to create lots of bells and whistles and fancy things, they all left Bitcoin and went to work on Ethereum. Many of them became very rich as a byproduct. But we had a period of relative peace in Bitcoin history, where where all the shit coins and tokens and NFTs and garbage was on Ethereum and other chains, later Solana, Cardano in part. And so we had this period of peace really from 2014 to, call it, 2023. We had a software upgrade in 2021, I believe it was. This was the Taproot soft fork, which was a very accepted soft fork, and it shipped with a bug that basically made it possible to embed data and sort of sneak it into people's nodes and sneak it into transactions on the input side of things. And someone figured out that you could use this to create shitcoins on Bitcoin, and also to create NFTs on Bitcoin. And so the Bitcoin blockchain began to be attacked, and the network began to be attacked starting in early 2023. And basically this was a movement that was sort of funded by various VCs, venture capitalists in the space. David Bailey of the Bitcoin Conference, Bitcoin Magazine, is one who funded a bunch of them. A company called Taproot Wizards is a well-known example. And these had the effect of sort of giving these startups money to spam the blockchain. And they tried to create by promoting these at the conference and promoting them online, saying we're going to make Bitcoin fun again. We're going to let people do collectibles on Bitcoin, and we can issue shitcoins on Bitcoin. And this was at the point where, obviously people lose money in shitcoins, and then they don't want to buy shitcoins anymore. So the scammers and spammers always have to come up with new solutions for this. And the way they do that is they decide to bring this stuff back home to Bitcoin, as if putting a scam on Bitcoin. Bitcoin has a very nice brand and a very strong brand. And so people who aren't paying attention might think that, well, Bitcoin's permissionless. Who are you to tell people they can't scam on Bitcoin? Well, the problem with scamming on Bitcoin and spamming the Bitcoin blockchain is it violates Bitcoin culture, which is this idea that we don't want to abuse the blockchain and put too much stuff on there. We want to keep it lean and mean. And so basically what happened in 2023 and 2024 was what's called the UTXO set. So a UTXO is just a chunk of unspent Bitcoin. And it's very important for nodes this is something that nodes need to keep. They can't prune it. And the reason nodes need to keep this is because when they see a transaction, they need to be able to double check to make sure the Bitcoin hasn't been spent already. Otherwise we run into things like the double spending problem. And so the result of this was the UTXO set, which is the collection of all this unspent Bitcoin, that's the most important thing. This set grew from 4 gigabytes in late 2022 to about 12 gigabytes by, call it, the middle of 2024. And we saw massive spam attacks around the time of the 2024 Bitcoin halving. Anyone who's trying to transact on chain, then you'd have to pay maybe $50 or $100 to do a transaction. This hurt a lot of people in the global south who couldn't transact on chain. And it even hurt people who are trying to open and close Lightning channels because they were being priced out by the spam, these very spam attacks. And the sad thing about this is these spam attacks were funded by Bitcoiners, prominent Bitcoiners, OGs, people like David Bailey, who had been in the space for a long time and had done a lot of good and were respected. And it was not opposed this time by the Bitcoin core devs who had opposed it back in 2023 and back in 2013 and 2014. There'd been a sort of a changing of the guard when it came to the Bitcoin core devs. A lot of the older ones, kind of the original cypherpunk types, ended up retiring because they got rich. And there was also this guy named Fake Toshi, Craig Wright, who was like suing Bitcoin core devs and just suing everyone and causing a lot of problems. And if you're a rich Bitcoin core dev, you don't really need this mess. So there was a lot of people retired or stopped working on the project, and then they were replaced by much younger devs, a lot of people just fresh out of college, like Gloria Zhao, for example, who's no longer with Bitcoin Core. That there's this push basically by the funding organizations that fund these core devs to bring in very young people and to sort of institute a more corporate culture and to get people together in offices in large blue cities like San Francisco and New York and London. And so you had a very different, these people had a very different view of Bitcoin. And I would argue that they were not steeped in Bitcoin culture. So for example, Gloria Zhao, she'd grown up in the Bay Area, went to UC Berkeley as an undergrad. I think she studied computer science. And while she was there, she worked on shitcoins like she showed. You could still look at her GitHub and see how she was showing people how to do ICO scams on Ethereum. And so this was someone who was, I believe for reasons of nepotism and DEI as well, was promoted very rapidly to Bitcoin core maintainer, which is someone who has write access to the repo and can actually make changes to the software. So you had this changing of the guard. You had a lot of young people there who had imbibed a little too much postmodernism from UC Berkeley. And I'd seen it firsthand in the 90s, and it only got worse since then. Postmodernism, post-structuralism, wokeism, and just a general agnosticism. Like they didn't understand that Bitcoin was money, and they weren't willing to enforce it as money. So when these spam attacks happened, we had a lot of young devs who were part of various social cliques that were also interacting with shitcoiners in New York City, for example, and in San Francisco, kind of moving in the same social circles. And so as a result, we did not have the same hostility showed by Bitcoin Core to these spammers and scammers. And there was an effort made by people like Luke Dasher. Luke Dasher created a pull request and a software patch to patch the hole that had been opened up as part of the Taproot upgrade. This is what we call the inscriptions exploit that made possible these shitcoins on Bitcoin and NFTs on Bitcoin. At the time, this was early 2023. If Bitcoin Core had paid attention to Luke Dasher, who's really the OG of Bitcoin Core devs or Bitcoin devs, he's been around since 2011, and he now runs a fork of Bitcoin Core called Bitcoin Knots, which is the software that I run. But a guy who's really steeped in, very serious guy who's really steeped in Bitcoin culture, and he was mining. He had a mining pool back in 2013, 2014. So he knows He knows more about the Bitcoin code base and Bitcoin than maybe any living human being, and he's a genius programmer. So he saw this for the attack that it was, because he had lived through 2013 and 2014, and he basically submitted a request to the Bitcoin core devs to close this particular hole. And if they had listened to him, we would not be suffering with this bloated UTXO set that we are now. And the Taproot upgrade turned out, in retrospect, to be very bad, because 90% of Taproot outputs now are just spam and dust. And the whole UTXO set, I think, is 50% dust at this point, or more than 50% spam. And so what happened is Bitcoin Core refused to merge that fix for the bug that shipped with Taproot. And the reason they gave for it, or the reason one of the core devs named A. Chow gave for it, was that this is too contentious, this is too controversial. And A. Chow said, we don't merge controversial changes to Bitcoin. So fast forward, and that's kind of a reasonable thing to say. Fast forward to 2025. In May, June of 2025, Bitcoin Core decided, after having not fixed this one hole in Bitcoin, the inscriptions exploit, they decided to blow open another hole in Bitcoin and expand op return from 80 bytes, where it had been since, call it 2015, expand op return from 80 bytes to 100,000 bytes. They basically blew open op return, what's called data carrier size, and they removed the cap. They completely uncapped it, and now it's basically capped just by a different filter, some sort of 100,000 byte filter. The problem with this is, and you can play around on your computer with this. You can take an emoji, find an emoji, and ask AI, or look right click on it and figure out how much data it takes up. Maybe it takes up 30 bytes or something. Maybe if it's a very complex emoji, it takes up 80 bytes or 120 bytes if it's a fancy emoji. And so there's not that much you can put in the chain if you have an op return of 40 or 80 bytes. And it's really just intended for like a hash of a larger amount of data. But what happened when they blew open op return is they made it possible to put larger blobs of data in this place. And this is what's opened up the network to just a whole range of attacks. So if you think about it, this idea that, for example, what if you ran a home server and you just opened it up to the internet? You didn't have any sort of firewall, and you just let people post whatever they want on your server. And we know what would end up there. It'd be a lot of porn. It'd be a lot of swastikas. It'd probably be a lot of cat pictures. It'd just be junk, basically. And no one is stupid enough to do that. And servers have various controls. But the problem with op return is it functions in this way. Op returns since 2013 and 2014, and you can Google this, you can ask ChatGPT or Grok, what is the designated place in Bitcoin for non-monetary data, for arbitrary data? You do any search for that. And this is part of Bitcoin culture. Op return is the place you can put a small amount of arbitrary data, non-monetary data. And so what Bitcoin Core did in 2025 is they blew this open. So 100,000 bytes is a lot more, obviously, than 80 bytes. It's 1,250 times as big. And instead of being able to put just a tiny emoji or a little hash of some data, you can put a very high fidelity picture. And you can even put a short video or an MP4. And when you think about it, there's really nothing. The Bitcoin blockchain is just full of financial history. And we have all these, you can go back and look inside of blocks, and you can see various Bitcoin addresses and transactions that have taken place. And obviously, just like the US dollar, some of these transactions were probably for very bad things. They could be people buying bad things, or drugs, sex, weapons, whatever, war, etc. But as Bitcoiners, we agree to, and it's all pseudonymous, so we don't really know. You can't really see that, oh, this was a North Korean hacker or some terrorist or something. But what we do when we run a node, when we use Bitcoin as money, there's sort of this agreement. There's this gentleman's agreement that basically I'll download the whole blockchain because I need it to run a full archival node. And I understand that there's probably, money is used for good things. It's used for bad things. It's just like fire. It's sort of a neutral thing. And so it's one thing to expect Bitcoiners to store transactions, monetary transactions. And the only reason, and we're incentivized to do this, because if I want you to store my monetary transaction or to enable me to transact on Bitcoin, if I want you to allow it, I should enable that for you as well. And so there's this reciprocity that's involved. But if you think about it, once you start to introduce large blobs of arbitrary data on Bitcoin, which is similar to just creating a server and letting anyone upload whatever they want to it. Once you do this, it's a completely different world. You're then asking people who want to spin up a new node to download whatever crap someone has put into the blockchain. And it could be the extreme example, of course, is CSAM, which is some people are confused and they think, oh, we're trying to conform ourselves to government rules. And, just somehow if we enforce these rules for CSAM, that the next thing we'll do is we'll censor monetary transactions. Well, certainly I'm not going to censor monetary transactions. I want to use Bitcoin as money, but I will censor CSAM transactions because I don't want that crap on my computer. And even if it were legal, this isn't a legal question. If I was living in a country, which there's probably no country where it's legal, I still wouldn't want it on my computer because it's disgusting. I have children, it's unethical. And so when you begin to think about it, arbitrary data, there's many different. Think about all the different cultures in the world and all the different people. And, some people will think certain symbols are cool and some people will be incredibly offended by it. You can have cartoons of religious figures, which in the past have caused, actual riots in cities. This is just a mess that no one wants. Like, I signed up to use Bitcoin as money. I don't want to have to worry about what's on my node. I don't want to have to relay CSAM across the internet. I don't want to have to relay just any arbitrary data that doesn't make Bitcoin better money, because it exposes me as a node runner to risks. It's bad for Bitcoin's brand. And so this is what Bitcoin Core enabled last year by blowing open op return. And the last point I wanted to make about this was an extremely controversial change. And basically, there was a huge fight online on X and on the GitHub repo. That there was a lot of funny business that was involved, where you have this process where various people have to approve stuff. They can either ACK it, in other words, acknowledge or say yes to the change, and other people will NACK it, which means to not accept the change. So there's a lot of funny business with the actual software in the repo, where they were letting people get access to ACK it, but if they wanted to NACK it, and people were banned from it. Highly, highly controversial change. Ended up, when people realized that Bitcoin Core was not going to back down, a lot of us just stopped running Bitcoin Core software. We migrated to Bitcoin Knots, and that's the node type that I run today. And Bitcoin Knots is maintained by Luke Dasher, who's a great guy, and a brilliant guy who's also been able to protect us from a lot of bugs that have ended up in Bitcoin Core. So the whole Bitcoin Core software development process is broken. They just had a new bug disclosed yesterday. They had a bug earlier in 2026, the beginning of 2026, that actually deleted your wallet when you ran it. They forced you to upgrade your Bitcoin wallet as part of spinning up a node or upgrading your node, and then it deleted your wallet and people lost money. So there's a real problem happening over at Bitcoin Core. It's hard to know whether they've been somehow infiltrated, corrupted, compromised, whether they're just young kids who don't have much experience and they don't have sort of a cypherpunk ideal. So what happened is, in spite of all this contention, you'll remember that I said in 2023, H. House said she was not going to merge, he or she, I don't know what to call her, H. House said they were not going to merge this contentious change to Bitcoin Core, and because it was Luke's patch, because it was too contentious. And what we saw in 2025 is that they were happy to merge this very contentious change, blowing open op return. And that's when a lot of us realized that there was probably something malicious going on, because you can't be selective and say we only merge contentious things that we like. There's this idea that Bitcoin Core devs and the maintainers, they're like janitors, they fix bugs, they do operating system updates, and they don't really do anything that the community is against. They don't do anything contentious, as H. House said in 2023, but they were very happy to push through this highly contentious change in 2025. It appears all the discussion happened offline, because these people are working in offices together. They're not these isolated cypherpunks, living in El Salvador in the jungle, or living, all over the world. they're all in the same social circles. They're interacting with shitcoiners and people who want to do Bitcoin affinity scams. And so at that point, it became apparent to a lot of us who had been following it that something very, very wrong was going on, and that there was quite likely, what we realized is if there were an attack on Bitcoin, this could certainly be what it looked like. And this is another part of, I would say, another part of Bitcoin culture, which is adversarial thinking. And we all question each other. And it can be hard in Bitcoin because you may have Bitcoiner friends who are on the other side of the aisle when it comes to some of these debates or civil wars. And this is a vulnerability. And I remember Giacomo Zucco saying a few years ago that this is the hardest thing in Bitcoin, is to call out your Bitcoiner friend when they're doing something that's bad for Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin is currently embroiled in a civil war that was caused by Bitcoin Core's negligence and their changing of the culture. And so to sort of loop back and return to this idea that culture, the consensus flows from culture. Culture, if you change Bitcoin culture, then the consensus rules, the actual software rules that are enforced, will end up getting changed. And this is what we've seen, where there's a hostility to spam and to NFTs and just putting any junk on chain back in 2013 and 2014. And then this really changed in 2023 for a lot of people. And there are lots of newcomers coming to Bitcoin. Some people maybe came to Bitcoin because they wanted to do NFTs. And I would argue that's not the right way to onboard people to Bitcoin. That people come to Bitcoin to shitcoin. Very rarely, usually they're just paid actors who just want to sell these things to other people. But this is the context for the consensus rules changing. If you have a change in Bitcoin culture, where you have the community and especially the devs who have write access to the repo, when you have them no longer recognizing and understanding the history of how Bitcoin spam has been treated. And if there's strong reasons why this should change, why Bitcoin is no longer money, that's something you need to take up with the community. But consensus flows from culture, and this is the great risk to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is only as good as the Bitcoiners who run the software and enforce the consensus rules. And we're very, if we Bitcoiners want to change Bitcoin, we can change it. We can increase the 21 million cap if we all agree to do it. And if we do I'm not sure if that'd be a soft fork or a hard fork, probably a hard fork. But this is why it's so important to protect Bitcoin culture. And it's very similar. The analogy I like to use here is the U.S. Constitution. And so many of us who respect the Constitution as a document, we look at how the Constitution, we look at how the system of government works in the U.S. in 2026 at the 250th anniversary coming up, and it's very different from 1776. And people who think that we're still a constitutional republic, that this is how politics functions, are very confused, because we have a ton of money in politics. We have much higher taxes. We have an income tax. We have a central bank. We have lobbyists. We have big pharma. We have big war. We have big food. The way the U.S. functions is it's very, very different. And it's gone through. We're kind of at the American Empire, the end of the American Empire, and so much is driven by the military-industrial complex and the financial-industrial complex. And people like Simon Dixon have done a great job recently of talking about this. So I'd encourage people to check out his interviews as well. So that the changes, we still have the U.S. Constitution, and the example I like to use is the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment hasn't changed, but it's been diluted, and the culture around it has changed. And I'm very grateful for the Second Amendment, which is obviously the right to bear arms, which wasn't just put there for hunting. There's been a lot of revisionism. It wasn't just put there for hunting or to defend your family, though those are both great things. It's cool to be able to get your own meat and also to protect your wife and kids. But I think the real reason the founders put it in there was this is a form of decentralized, distributed defense. And it's a defense against a tyrannical government. And so, unfortunately, the American founding father culture has changed, And you have a lot of Americans now who, they definitely want to get rid of the Second Amendment, but the Second Amendment has been weakened. It's been weakened in many different ways when it comes to permits and licenses and how you're supposed to store the guns at home, et cetera. And this goes against the whole reason that it exists, because if the Second Amendment is there to protect us from tyrannical governments, then there's no reason to why it's absurd to say that you need a license or a permit, because if you're trying to defend against government tyranny, you should need to ask the government for permission to use a gun. And so I think that's an example of the culture changing. The consensus rule is still there. The Second Amendment is still there, and it's enforced in various ways all the way up to the Supreme Court. But it's really been watered down, and it has changed. And it is not, the U.S. American culture has not changed. I don't think it's changed for the better. And I admire the founders' vision. So this is the risk in Bitcoin, that we could be like, well, we're still Bitcoiners, but we're fine with shitcoins on top of Bitcoin and NFTs on top of Bitcoin. And when you first become a Bitcoiner, you should buy a stock in a Bitcoin treasury company instead. Like there's the culture can change, and this has real repercussions because the network is made up of Bitcoiners running nodes. And so if the culture changes, then the consensus rules, which are enforced by the nodes, will change over time. And this is the real danger. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners are very complacent about the risks here. They seem to think that Bitcoin has these magical alchemical properties, whereas Bitcoin is secured by the human action of Bitcoiners. And newcomers to Bitcoin, even newcomers to my videos, are often offended by the immune system of Bitcoin in action and how we call each other out and how we meme shitcoiners and make fun of them. And we call out scammers and spammers. And this is a very, this isn't how I treat people in my personal life. I don't treat my wife and kids and friends or a waitress or something like that. I'm not toxic to them. I'm actually a nice guy in real life. But when you're defending the Bitcoin network, there's an amount of toxicity that needs to happen, because if you don't, if you don't have the gun, using the Second Amendment analogy, then why would you expect the burglar or the murderer to listen to you? And so nodes enforce the consensus rules. The civil wars escalate to the point where we're actually at the point of doing a soft fork and trying to reverse some of the damage that Bitcoin Core has done over the past 2-3 years. And so this is the soft fork. If you're deep into Bitcoin, you will have heard of BIP 110. Used to be called BIP 444 or RDTS, which stands for Reduced Data Temporary Soft Fork. This is the effort of many of us, and currently about 13% of the network is running this new client. What we're trying to do is to revert the mistakes that Bitcoin Core made and basically return Bitcoin to where it was in 2022 before these attacks happened. And so we're getting rid of the inscriptions bug, and we're bringing op-return back down to 80 bytes. And this will be done at the consensus level. So it'll be enforced at the level of mined blocks. I didn't really go into it, but last year's debate was much more about what's called mempool policy, or policy, which deals with the kind of transactions that Bitcoin nodes relay to each other. And these are mostly unmined, unconfirmed transactions that haven't yet made their way into a block. So part of the debate was about mempool filters. And what Bitcoin Core did last year was actually a change at the filter level, saying that the new Bitcoin Core software would allow nodes to relay op returns up to 100,000 bytes. But basically, we're in a situation now where we've had to escalate to the level of proposing and activating a temporary soft fork to protect Bitcoin, to protect it from CSAM, and also to really push back, because we cannot have a situation where the reference implementation, namely Bitcoin Core, is able to push through something unilaterally against the wishes of a large percentage of the network. So they ended up losing more than 20% of the network after they did that. And yet they still haven't reverted the changes. They're still on the same terrible path. and there a lot of the devs there seem to be okay with this idea of turning Bitcoin into Ethereum and basically filling up the chain with garbage. And this is where the Peter Thiel company Shitria that we alluded to early comes in. And so there's been this gradual escalation that this sort of escalation wasn't necessary. It wasn't needed in 2013 and 2014 because Bitcoin Core was hostile to spam. And we still had that cypherpunk ideal back then. So the community was hostile to spam and Bitcoin Core was hostile to spam. And so doing these mempool filter level changes, doing opReturn and limiting it to 80 bytes was enough. But we're at the point now where Bitcoin Core itself has gone hostile and has refused to mend its ways. And so ultimately, Bitcoin is not controlled by the miners. It's not controlled by the devs. It's not controlled by the exchanges. It's not controlled by bankers or politicians. It's controlled by node runners like you and me who run software. This is the cypherpunk ideal. We don't fight in the physical world. We fight using software. And it's a very nonviolent revolution, which is one thing I like about it, because I think violent revolutions are always very bad end up being very bad for your own family and the people in your community, et cetera. So this is one of the hopes that Bitcoin Core could that Bitcoin can avoid this by doing a soft fork. And so there's been this escalation from the level of mempool filters all the way up to now this temporary soft fork, which is in the process of being activated and will certainly be activated by August at the latest.
So there's a lot to unpack there, and I'll try to do it I'll try to be articulate and not puke it all out. And I'll try to be patient. So I didn't realize that BIP44 became BIP110.
There's a lot of inside baseball there, but it's basically the same proposal. It was just like everything in Bitcoin, because it's decentralized. There was a big fight about what number. We're really at that level. There's a fight about what number to use for it, and that's its own rabbit hole. But we don't need to go there.
Yeah, no. I find it interesting too that Americans and people around the world are doing a great job of maybe funding our own dystopic future through SpaceX, Palantir, Facebook, and even things like shitcoins. In one way, I think shitcoins were an attack. I think they're a state-sponsored attack.
I agree with
the
you.
VC angle to milk retail, and to get retail to spend all that money and lose all that money so they can build out the future dystopian stablecoin financial surveillance CBDC infrastructure. And we pay for it along the way. We fund the projects, they pick the winners. And it's the same thing in the stock market in a lot of ways. And I you think about how little money it takes to sort of fund a Vitalik Buterin. And I don't believe his origin story. I think Joe Lubin and all those guys probably had a bigger influence than he did. I think they needed a Zuckerberg, idiot savant front man to kind of make it.
He was actually a scammer before that. He did ironically, given the current context, he did a quantum computing scam right before Ethereum. So he's He's a
prime candidate, and it's just a non-zero, chance that he's just not an honest actor or not the player, the construct that we're led to believe. And I wonder if we've always been under attack from both sides. And even if Bitcoin was created or founded or discovered by the state, it doesn't mean it isn't what it is now for humanity, whether it got out of the bag or they seeded it. Maybe Satoshi handed the keys to Gavin in that manner to make Bitcoin look rogue and to give Gavin a lot of power that he wouldn't necessarily have had. I think about the block wars and whether we were attacked from both sides. And one way I think about that, I don't know how little blocks or smaller blocks can be bad. I'm kind of a purist. I want Bitcoin to be money. I want to understand what spam is because I think non-monetary transactions don't belong on the chain because of the respect and the culture and the vision that we're trying to achieve. And part of that, the way I think about that is the internet is not everything it could have been. And Bitcoin is going to end up in some shape or form, not everything it could have been. And every sort of degradation leads to a much different outcome, even if it's like really 1%. Well so with little blocks and big blocks, like maybe big blocks really bad. Little blocks may be good, but if they seed in, it's like I believe one party controls both sides of Republicans and Democrats, and sort of like World Wrestling. The owners benefit whoever wins, and they need a heel. And the heel can even change teams.
I
every
think
few
it's very.
years.
I think you're right about
And
that.
people,
There's.
you know,
I think it's. There's probably a uniparty, but it's even more complicated than that. There's just like lots of international groups
right.
that have their own. Yeah.
Yeah, that maybe they're vying for power with amongst
Yeah, it's
themselves.
hard.
I really don't
They
know.
don't tell us, do they?
No, but they have more in common
Yeah.
with each other than they do with me
too.
and with you. And so it's then you look at sort of like little blocks, big blocks. Maybe there are some quote unquote heroes, and I try not to have any heroes. I'd never wear another man's name on my back. But like, I like ideas, and people have great ideas. And sometimes people have lots of great ideas in a row, and doesn't mean their next idea is great. And sometimes people have terrible ideas, and then they have a great idea. So not everyone who's been wrong once is never right again. But maybe some of these little block peoples will put on a pedestal so that we would believe them in future fights.
Well, we should pause and tell listeners. So that this whole debate about big blocks and the big blockers versus the small blockers, and this was kind of the heart of the block size wars or the fork wars of 2015 to 2017. There's a great book you can read by Jonathan Beer. I think it's called The Block Size War. This was a debate. It was a debate about block size, but it's also just a debate about who gets to change the consensus rules in Bitcoin. So it's quite relevant for understanding the current struggle. But the idea, the reason to want smaller blocks is to make it easier to run a node so that the blockchain grows more slowly over time. And Luke Dasher was actually a visionary in this respect as well. He was arguing at the time, I don't know when he started arguing this, but he was arguing that 1 megabyte blocks were already too big. That's sort of where Satoshi left things. And it appears to me, I agree with Luke on this one, that Satoshi basically made a mistake. He made blocks too big. And so and then Roger Ver and the big blockers, they just didn't understand this, and they compounded it by doing 8 megabyte blocks. And but the reason to have small blocks is to have as lean and mean a blockchain as possible. And it's not just about the storage, because you often hear people say, well, just go out and buy buy some extra storage for your node. So the thing about small blocks versus big blocks, people sometimes say you can just, it's not a big deal, just buy $100 worth of more storage. And I think this is sort of disrespectful to people who live in, I visited Cuba once and stayed in Airbnb, and the woman was an internist, just a brilliant doctor. She made $2 a day. So if you tell people like that, obviously, I'm not sure you can run a Bitcoin node in Cuba, but you probably can. Telling her to just buy $100 worth of storage, which is 50 days worth of earnings, is kind of obnoxious. So we want everyone from every socioeconomic in every country to be able to buy, to be able to run a Bitcoin node. The other thing that people, and this is part of the problem with these spam attacks from 2023 and 2024, that the sort of low end hardware, like the Raspberry, some of the cheaper Raspberry Pis, no longer work to run a Bitcoin node. So this has had real damage for the decentralization of the network. We want everyone to be able to run a node, because we don't just want rich people in San Francisco or Apple and Wells Fargo to run nodes for us, because in that case they can be captured and it's all over. And so in many ways the fight against spam is very similar to the block size wars and the small blockers. And what they have in common is that this respect for node runners and trying to keep the network decentralized by making it as easy as possible to run a node. And it's not just about the size of the blockchain and the storage, it's also about bandwidth issues. If you think about people in parts of the world where they may not have quite as fast an internet speed, when you spin up a node, you need to download and validate the entire blockchain since 2009. And a lot of these Bitcoin core devs, they're in these office buildings in San Francisco and the Presidio or wherever, and they've got high-speed internet, and they've got a $3,000 laptop, and they're like, well, I'm not having any problems with my node. But we want this to be very, very egalitarian, or at least make it possible for people to run nodes. But the other problem is that we're all used to, we all have very short attention spans, myself included. And if I ever try to download a new app on my iPhone, for example, and it takes more than 15 seconds, 30 seconds, I'm gone. Unless it's really important, I lose attention. Spinning up a new Bitcoin node, we're lucky today if it takes 12 hours. I think if you have good broadband like I do, and I haven't spun up a node in a while, but this is the real. It doesn't have to do with storage. It doesn't necessarily have to do with RAM. It basically, we need it to be as fast and easy as possible to spin up a Bitcoin node, because even if you can, it doesn't mean that you will. And especially now, I heard Bitcoin Mechanic talking about this on a recent video. He said he tried to, he was just for the heck of it was going to start and he's kind of a Bitcoin OG. He was going to spin up a new node, and he lives in Canada, to be publicly disclosed. And he said he either went to order it online and it was 15, if I remember correctly, $1,500 Canadian, which is, that's not like, it used to be like, $100, $200 to get the Raspberry Pi, or you could even, Raspberry Pis before COVID, I was buying them for like $5 or $10 for a little Raspberry Pi. And so all these, and then obviously the price of RAM has spiked, and a lot of these things have been byproducts of AI and people wanting to use this hardware for other things. But that's the really important thing, is just to make it as easy and fast as possible for people to run nodes. And I believe it was possible to run a node, for example, on an iPhone back in 2013. And it's obviously no longer possible now. So sometimes people will invoke Moore's law and similar laws, saying, don't worry about it because the technology ensures that everything gets cheaper and faster. And they'll say, that Moore's law is exponential and the blockchain growth is arithmetical or constant slope. And this is if you look over the last decade, it's actually, or the last 15 years, it's become much more difficult to run a node in spite of even Moore's law hasn't really bailed us out. And there's some debate about things like Moore's law, how much further they can continue, because we're really getting to the nano microscopic levels on a lot of these chips, et cetera. And so one of the other reasons not to have, no one wants CSAM on their node, but also we don't want to do anything that makes it more difficult to spin up a new node. This is called IBD, initial block download. And this is the real bottleneck and the real concern. So when people say you can just buy $100 worth of storage, that doesn't matter. Like, that's not a problem for, most people who live in maybe America or Europe or wherever today. But if it takes you 3 or 4 weeks to spin up a node, maybe you just won't do it. And there's got to be a large class of people who just aren't willing to do that. Or you try to spin up a new node and it keeps stopping halfway through, and then you have to start again and download it. Not a lot of people have patience for that. So that's sort of my aside about the small blockers understood this very well. The big blockers, they didn't, for some reason, even people like Roger Ver, who used to be called Bitcoin Jesus and was very early to Bitcoin, he didn't seem to understand this very obvious engineering point that even an English major like me can understand, that basically you want to keep the blockchain as lean and mean as possible and make it easy for people to spin up nodes. Roger Ver is famous for saying that he didn't care if Bitcoin he wanted larger blocks, even if it turned Bitcoin into PayPal 2.0, which certainly we don't need PayPal 2.0 because we've got Venmo and Zelle and PayPal, and what we need is censorship resistant money. So this is, I guess, this whole aside is just another a way of saying that spam has these other implications and can ultimately hurt Bitcoin node centralization. You can imagine if we end up with CSAM on the chain, that who's going to want to spin up a new node and have to download that stuff? You're just opening yourself up to not just legal attacks, but it's just not something you'd feel good about.
Well, Roger Ver is interesting. I find that maybe I love that he was Bitcoin Jesus, and he not many people evangelized.
Yeah, he did a lot of good for Bitcoin. It's important to remember.
And I find that, so he got the beginning right. I feel like he got the middle wrong, but the end is like, we got to use Bitcoin as money, and he's kind of there too. And the state has attacked Roger in lots of ways. But so he's a confusing person to me. I'd like to hear more from him about the use Bitcoin as money. I'm not happy about the state going after him.
No, definitely not. It's hard to know exactly what happened there, but it seems like he paid an exit tax and then they came back after him for other reasons, but I don't know the details.
Who knows? I don't like to see, yeah. And then one thing that I think that I'd love for you to kind of break down, though, is how is op return like email attachments versus just a transaction as a transaction and
Oh
an
yeah,
email as an
yeah.
email
That's an analogy
in
that
terms of
I
what I'm sending and how involved I am in knowing what I'm sending.
Yeah, so this is I think it's an important point that you make, and there's a debate about there's a certain debate where Bitcoin Core was saying no one knows what spam is, and that was the most disturbing kind of modern part of it. Spam is obviously just anything that makes Bitcoin worse money or it's non-monetary. And it's a little bit like that judge who was like he said I can't define pornography, but I know what it is when I see it, and we all know what spam is when we see it. We know what, and it's so absurd that these brilliant technical geniuses at Bitcoin Core who can code and I can't code, somehow have imbibed this postmodern ideology from the universities that no one really knows what a man is or a woman is, or no one knows what spam is, and there's some analogies there. But and so there's first the argument that we don't know what spam is, but once you understand that shitcoins on Bitcoin and in JPEGs and MP4s, this MP3s or 4s, this is definitely spam. Then the argument from the other side is often, well, it's possible to, all information is ultimately zeros and ones. It's always possible to embed data within other data. You can convert, something from a QR code to numbers, to letters, and so this is something called steganography, which comes from the Greek for hidden writing, stegano and graphos. And this is the idea that you can embed data, and so it is possible to sneak stuff into Bitcoin. And the analogy I like to use for op return and steganography is this email analogy that you brought up. And so the way I explain it is that I can send you an email, and it could just look like a normal email, but maybe there's some code that I attach to it. So T equals the number 2, and H equals the number 3. And so I send you an email, or maybe I send you an email and your friend an email, and I give your friend the secret code so he knows how to decode it. You think it's just a friendly email from me talking about a barbecue we're going to have on Sunday, but your friend realizes that it's actually, it's the coordinates to where the buried treasure is or something. And I've embedded that. Each letter in the email text corresponds to a number, and this is the GPS or whatever. Or maybe there's a secret message, or you can take those letters and convert them to a picture, etc. So that's steganography. That's hiding stuff in an email, and there's no way to prevent that, obviously, and there's no way to prevent that with Bitcoin. But if I send you an email with an attachment, everyone knows that the attachment is a file, and maybe it's an image or a video or whatever it is, and that is if so. To use the gross extreme example, which we seem to keep coming back to, which is probably my fault, the CSAM example, because this really is an attack vector for the Bitcoin network. If let's not say it's you and me, let's say it's two people, because it's really gross. If person A sends to person B an email, and it's basically like child sexual abuse material embedded in the email. So you can, if you have the secret code, these are like two pedophiles, you have the secret code, you can convert the letters into some horrific image and see what's in it. That's a terrible thing, but it's very hard for Google to filter that. And it's also, if you don't know it's there and you're not into those things, it's not the worst thing in the world. Like, there's probably lots of weird stuff on websites that we visit that's embedded there that we somehow, someone has put there, maybe some hacker at the software company put it there. But if person A emails person B a JPEG attachment of child sexual abuse material, CSAM, that's attachments are where you put files. And so you can, there's the first example, the text of the email, steganography, but the attached file, you're gonna have a hard time arguing, Your Honor, this JPEG is, it's actually a musical composition, and it may look like this horrendous material. And so op return functions in this way, in a similar way in Bitcoin, where you can embed secret things in Bitcoin. No one can stop you. You can chop it up and embed it in various places. But what we're trying to fight is people putting large files in opreturn. Because again, as we talked about earlier in this conversation, opreturn has been the designated place. This is the Bitcoin protocol saying, oh, you have like a small file you want to store in Bitcoin, put it in opreturn. So what Bitcoin Core did, and they're so stuck in there. Yeah, it's basically the general. It's been a strange pushback from Bitcoin Core and the people on the other side saying, well, you can always embed stuff in the Bitcoin blockchain, just like you can always embed stuff in an email text. And our pushback from our side has been, well, it's opreturn's more like an email attachment, where this has always been the designated spot. And yes, we can't stop spam completely, but there's this very strange thing, this idea, and we alluded to it before with Gmail. You know, if Google came to you and said, we can't stop all spam, so we're not going to try to stop any spam emails, you would just think they're crazy. But this is actually the argument that Bitcoin Core devs have been making for the past 12 months. We can't stop all spam, so we're not even going to try. So then that leads to various, possibly conspiracy theories, like why is there so much pushback? This is something that was always understood in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is money. Bitcoin's a monetary network. But there does seem to be a whole side of Bitcoin Core devs who are much more agnostic and want to view Bitcoin as this arbitrary data storage platform and just sort of let it evolve on its own. It's a very strange way of looking at the world. There's some evidence that a lot of these devs who speak in this way, they don't own very much Bitcoin at all. They don't even run nodes. And so there's kind of a misalignment of incentives here. And then you have a lot of plebs like yourself and myself who are very serious about Bitcoin and family men and want to do what's right for Bitcoin and, poured our life savings into it. And it's quite terrifying, actually, to see Bitcoin in the hands of devs who just view it as another software gig and not something that's so important, not just for separating money and state, but also just for our families' futures. And we've invested so many of us have invested not just money, but our time and the learning. And to have to go back to square one and defend Bitcoin as money, it really does seem like a psyop of sorts. And it's unlikely that, I don't think there's some conspiracy that all Bitcoin Core devs are in on this. And there's even the core maintainers may not be in on this, but it does smack of postmodernism and the arguments. We don't know what spam is, but spam will still get outpriced by monetary transactions. This thing, we don't know what spam is, but we're sure it's going to be outpriced. Just various circular arguments. And there have been people like Adam Back who spent much of last year. It's obviously a Bitcoin OG who's mentioned in the Bitcoin white paper. He spent much of last year on X with many of us just making us run in circles, having these circular discussions. And so there's been just a lot of strangeness going on, a lot of gaslighting, a lot of efforts to convince us that this is how Bitcoin has always been, or that something has changed with the Bitcoin network. This has been an argument from Bitcoin Core that we all need to relay spam because it'll contribute to better fee estimation for blocks or better block propagation, or it will somehow help with Bitcoin mining centralization, which is a real problem. But at the same time, they seem unwilling to talk to miners, actual miners, like, for example, Bob Burnett of Barefoot Mining. They're not interested in talking to real Bitcoiners who are actually out in the field running Bitcoin mining rigs. And so you have this strange situation where there are these sort of technical reasons to blow open opreturn, but ignoring all of the really practical consequences like CSAM and just the increased burden on node runners. And so that makes many of us think that this may be part of some sort of coordinated attack by the deep state, or it's always hard to know, and you don't really know who's in on it and who's not. But just this push away from understanding Bitcoin as a monetary network and saying like somehow something has changed on the network and we need to be more open-minded, and who are you to say what money is, or who are you to say what Bitcoin is? It really does smack of has the same flavor as the culture wars, and you begin to feel like you're taking crazy pills. Like why am I arguing with long-term Bitcoin Core devs who are these master C++ programmers? Like they don't know what spam is all of a sudden, and they don't know Bitcoin history. And then you have people like Greg Maxwell, for example, who was a long-term, who was basically people like Peter Wolla and Greg Maxwell, who were involved with Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin in 2014 and 2013, 2014. They were involved in the previous op return wars, and yet they've somehow flipped their position on this and now say that UTXO set bloat's not a problem or spam is not a problem, and it will somehow resolve itself. And so that's these are the contradictions we've been dealing with, and it can be a fun game. Actually, I've made videos where I have Greg Maxwell of 2026 arguing with Greg Maxwell of 2015. But it's not what you want to see, because Greg Maxwell used to be a great guy. He contributed a lot to Bitcoin. And now he's kind of on the forums. He likes to stay in places where he can't be, places that are safe, that have very strong censorship of posts like Reddit or Delving Bitcoin or the Bitcoin dev mailing list. And a lot of these people are unwilling to expose themselves to the public square on X, for example, which is where the debate has been raging. So it's a very strange time to be alive. It's a very confusing time to be a Bitcoiner, where you feel like it's so similar to COVID, where it's like, this week don't wear masks, next week you have to wear masks, and you have to take off your mask. It's safe to take off your mask once you're at the dining room table, but not while you're waiting in line at the restaurant. And vaccines are safe and effective, but unvaccinated people are somehow a threat to you, even if you're vaccinated. It's the same sort of crazy debate, which makes many of us think, or gaslighting or changing narratives, which makes many of us think that there's maybe something darker going on here.
Well, I definitely feel something conspiratorial is going on. Why wouldn't large or big actors want to try to get involved? And I, just even thinking adversarially. And when this all bubbled up again, first you're like, oh, coders are just fighting. And coding's kind of like the one area where, it's really hard to, there's a lot of Bitcoin's very complex, and you kind of have to become an expert in several idioms or areas, mediums, or, and maybe one of them, so maybe someone's like, I really like coding and that's my area, and I like these 4 other areas, but I'm not going to get involved in culture or these other areas. And maybe someone else is like, I like the culture, I like the philosophy, I like the economics, but I don't like the coding and the cryptography. I'll learn as much as I need to. Don't trust, verify, but until while the argument's simmering, I might look to these voices that I trust to understand better. Mm-hmm. But it very, very quickly, to me, you look at something like chain code, and I'm like, what the fuck is that? That smells rotten. And you look at reasons I came to Bitcoin, beyond number go up, beyond separate money from state, is to get out of the culture wars.
Yeah.
To not have to get away from people risk, to be able to bet on myself and not worry about other people's mistakes in execution. Hey, I want to save in something, and I don't want to invest in a bar because my cousin Jimmy owns the bar, might lose the license. Or I don't want to invest in Amazon because Bezos might get caught on tape getting a blowjob and the stock's going to tank. Or Elon might smoke a joint on Rogan, and I got to deal with that for the next year when I want to retire.
Yeah.
And Core introduces it's like, wow, this is really centralized. There's only a few people that can do things. That feels not very Bitcoiny. And then they started to move fast and break things like Zuckerberg and Facebook, and that's not what we do.
Definitely.
And we were already dealing with second order and third order effects that maybe were unintended from Taproot and SegWit. So I kind of want to smash Core just in general. And we need decentralization. We should have more reference clients that are competing to be the best reference client. And things.
Yeah, I think there's a silver lining to all of this, which you're alluding to. That I don't want to paint a picture of doom, because it's actually very, very interesting to see the network routing around these hostile actors. And so Bitcoin,
the skies don't clear until we probably go through this. So I really want to get into BIP 110.
Yeah. So this is the soft fork that we briefly alluded to. Yeah. So BIP 110 is, as I said, it tries to basically revert these changes and bring Bitcoin back to where it was in 2022 before the inscriptions exploit and the op return, blowing open op return. And then it closes RDTS, which is the other name for it, stands for Reduced Data Temporary Soft Fork. So the reduced data piece of it is closing all of these fields, trying to make these various fields, these various places that people can stash non-monetary data on Bitcoin, making them as small as possible, and thus optimizing Bitcoin as money. So the two big ones are op return and inscriptions and BRC20 tokens, which use the same exploit. And then there are a couple. So you can go to bip110.org and you can read about it. And there's a link to the GitHub proposal there. There are a couple other fields that are part of it that are not really currently used, but this is also closing sort of future attack vectors that spammers might want to use. And if you read the BIP in depth, you will see that it doesn't claim to be able to stop spam. So there are a lot of straw manning attacks of this BIP saying, well, you can't stop spam, so this BIP is bad. What it actually says in the BIP, this BIP does not try to stop spam. It just tries to limit it. It tries to revert some of these changes that Core made, and it basically tries to demonstrate to the world that that Bitcoin Core cannot push through whatever it wants without serious repercussions. And as part of that, it's taking power away from Core. It's probably going to give more power to Bitcoin knots. We have other implementations in the works as well. But what we're really seeing is that the network escalating against the spammers and scammers. And again, this wasn't a soft fork wasn't necessary in 2013 and 2014 because we had the reference implementation. We had Bitcoin Core on our side. We had Greg Maxwell on our side. We had Peter Wool and all these great Bitcoiners on our side. This time, it's very, very strange because we have a lot of people, especially a lot of those OG Bitcoin Core devs, and a lot of some influencers as well, or Bitcoin celebrities, whatever you want to call them, who will say, I hate spam too, but there's nothing we can do about it, or I don't want to do anything about it. So you have to ask people. It's like people who say they hate crime, but they don't actually want to prosecute criminals, and they don't want to lock their door and put on an alarm system and get a gun and prosecute people who steal from drugstores, et cetera. So it's very strange in that way too, where you have a lot of people who are unwilling to commit and just be like, oh, I hate spam, but I'm unwilling to stick my neck out and do anything about it, which is a very non-Bitcoiner way of looking at the world, because many of us, have adjacent interests in maybe Austrian economics and this concept of human action and human freedom and basically taking personal responsibility in your life. And we've seen this with Bitcoin Core devs in particular. They're sort of I hate to say it, but kind of a bunch of spoiled children. They want all the freedom that comes with being able to code and to do things with Bitcoin. But when something goes wrong, they don't want to take personal responsibility. And it's a little bit like government mistakes, where you have the great financial crisis, but yet no one goes to jail. No one's ever prosecuted. Nothing ever happens. It's been it's been the same with Bitcoin Core, which you would expect, because this confirms to us that this is a very tight social clique, and they're optimizing for their own relations with each other. And some of these people, we've had funders dating devs. So there's been a lot of confusing office politics that would not be a problem. That obviously happens in offices, but it becomes much more risky when it's an open source project and the beneficiaries of this nepotism get pushed through much faster than, don't have the experience to deal with things, or the Bitcoin ethos to deal with spam attacks. So BIP110, it's a temporary soft fork. And so we should talk about this. This gets very confusing, this area of forks, and I've had to learn a lot in this process. But it's a fascinating. First thing we should say is that it's a really interesting time to be alive as a Bitcoiner. It's a very exciting time to be alive because we have Bitcoin plebs taking back control, and we've had so many new Bitcoiners and plebs running Bitcoin nodes over the last 12 months and learning how to mine with them. And basically, soft forks are the prerogative of nodes. It's basically a fork is a change in Bitcoin nodes in the Bitcoin rules that are enforced by nodes. So it's a software change. And the reason this is the ultimate way that the Bitcoin network protects itself is when sovereign Bitcoiners like you and me, we decide we're going to run a certain kind of software to enforce certain rules, and we're not happy with spam and CSAM on our nodes. So we're gonna push through a software update that closes those attack surfaces. I think that's a good metaphor to use as well. Closing the inscriptions exploit and the op return attack surfaces. And so we should say a fork there are two kinds of forks. There's a soft fork and a hard fork. A soft fork is a narrowing of the rules. So, for example, we could say in the real world, we could say, I accept for this club, we accept men who are wearing blue t-shirts and red t-shirts. Men can join this club. A soft fork would be we only accept men who are wearing blue shirts. So nodes who are running the original rule.
If you've ever needed liquidity but didn't want to sell your Bitcoin and trigger a taxable event, Firefish is the answer. Non-custodial Bitcoin-backed loans. Your keys stay in multi-sig the whole time. You access dollars without selling a single sat. Don't sell your Bitcoin. Live off it. Firefish.io, code matrix. Stampseed is the most analog object in your Bitcoin stack. No batteries, no firmware, no third-party trust. Just a titanium DIY kit that lets you hammer your seed words into solid metal. Fire-resistant, waterproof, crush-proof. The simplest, dumbest, most reliable backup for the most important sentence you'll ever own. Stampseed.com, code matrix for 15% off. Bitcoin gets kinda lonely when you only know people through a screen. Club Orange is the location-based social network that fixes that. Find the orange-pilled people in your city. The meetups, the merchants, the conversations that don't fit on a tweet. Download Club Orange today in the App Store or Google Play.
Would still accept, they know that men with blue shirts are allowed, but the updated rules narrow or contract the what was available before, whereas hard forks expand the rule set, expand the rules. And so this is what Roger Ver, we were talking about the big blockers, Bcash or Bitcoin Cash, Ver's project, the big blockers project, was a hard fork because they widened the rules. They said that 8 megabyte blocks or whatever it was is okay, whereas the small blockers wanted to keep stuff at 1 megabytes. So if you go from 1 megabyte blocks to half a megabyte blocks, enforcing that would be a soft fork. But if you go the other direction from 1 megabyte blocks to 8 megabyte blocks, that would be a hard fork, just by definition. And there are different ways of thinking about this. I just think it's important to be very consistent. And so this is the most helpful way I found of explaining it. Soft forks narrow the rules, hard forks expand the rules. The other axis we should be concerned with is this idea of chain splits. So what can happen in the Bitcoin blockchain, and this is very normal, this can happen every once in a while, even without a soft fork, is you end up temporarily with two versions of the blockchain. So you might think of it as, you could think of the sort of the history of Christianity and sort of a united church, and then you had a chain split. You had one chain split in 1054 when the Orthodox and the Catholics split off. They had a common history, and then they went their different directions. And then the Catholic fork split into, we had the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, and that split into 30,000 different denominations. And so that'd be the analogy for a chain split. But in the event of a chain split, you end up briefly or sometimes permanently with two different versions of the Bitcoin blockchain. And if it's a permanent split, which is basically what happened with Bcash, then people have to decide which one they consider to be the real Bitcoin. And in the case of that chain split, the Bitcoin won, and the other one was called Bcash. But in the past, we've only had the soft forks in Bitcoin have come without chain splits. So we had Taproot, the Taproot soft fork that we talked about in 2021 that introduced some of these vulnerabilities. That was a soft fork because it narrowed the rules, but there was no chain split. You get a chain split when you have miners mining on both sides of the two chains, and then eventually one chain will overtake the other chain. This is where it gets complicated. So what could happen with BIP 110 is we could have this could be the first soft fork that leads to a chain split, where you end up with two chains, but it's going to be a very strange chain split because I think we'll probably avoid this, but if it were to happen, let's say we have the BIP 110 chain, and then we have the legacy chain, the current chain. If we have a split like that, there's an asymmetry where going forward in time, the BIP 110 chain can wipe out or subsume the legacy chain, whereas the legacy chain, the one that's not enforcing the BIP 110 rules, cannot wipe out the BIP 110 chain. So there's this asymmetry, which means that it's an asymmetry that leads to the game theory where people are going to want to, or they're going to want to bail on the legacy chain and come over to the BIP 110 chain, simply because if you can think about it from a mining perspective, if you're mining blocks on the old chain and you're not allowed to spend your mining rewards for 100 blocks, there's this delay. If that chain gets wiped out, you may have spent millions of dollars for those mining those blocks, and you will not get the payout because those blocks will cease to exist. Basically, the chain with the most proof of work is the one that wins, or the longest chain, which is usually the one with the most proof of work. So there's a very complicated thing to explain. So there's two parts to the soft fork, and we're currently in the part where, well, let me rewind and explain it in terms of 2017. So in 2017, there was this decision made by the Bitcoin community, and not everyone wanted it, but a lot of people wanted it. It's called SegWit, which we talked about. And SegWit is what enables the Lightning Network, and it fixed something called transaction malleability. And so people had this idea for upgrading the Bitcoin rules. It was called SegWit. They put out a soft fork proposal, and they told the miners to activate it. And it turns out the miners, the large mining pools, the large Bitcoin mining pools, did not want to activate it. So then there was this situation where, and we have to understand in Bitcoin at that time, and even more today, they're basically like 5 mining pools that create 90% of the blocks. And they build the block templates. They get to decide what goes into blocks. And so they get to decide whether to signal for forks. So you can have this situation where you can be held hostage by, people talk about, well, the miners are not on board with this upgrade. It's important to understand that the miners is just like 5 people in the world. And so it's important to understand that these large mining pools, they work for you and me. They work for the Bitcoin plebs and Bitcoin node runners. And the mining pools, their job is just to do proof of work, to do SHA-256 double hashes, and to follow the rules that the Bitcoin nodes set. So what happened in 2017 is the miners refused to activate the soft fork. And we later learned that it was probably because the largest Chinese miner, which was also and still is the largest maker of Bitcoin mining rigs, namely Bitmain, they did not want to activate SegWit because it would have degraded an advantage they had with mining called ASIC boost, or secret ASIC boost. And so we had an upgrade, which was very good for the Bitcoin network, that enabled Lightning, that gave us Lightning today, that was being held hostage by a large Chinese mining pool that didn't want to upgrade the rules because it would have hurt their own. They were basically cheating when it came to Bitcoin mining. And so what happened then is a guy named Shaolin Fry, a NIM, and then later Luke Dasher came up with this idea of a user-activated soft fork, where the Bitcoin nodes themselves would activate the soft fork. And the way they did it is they basically they wrote a new client, and this client said, if you're a miner, if you're mining blocks, your block will only be valid, will only be accepted by the network if you signal for SegWit. If you flip this version bit, and signal for SegWit. And it was 500, there were probably 100,000 nodes back then, and only 500 people running this UASF client. And on the other side were all the big all the big Bitcoin mining pools, companies like Coinbase, all the large American Bitcoin and crypto corporations were against this. And then you had all the Bcashers, all the Roger Ver people who hated SegWit, ended up forking off right as SegWit was getting activated. So to summarize, SegWit started off as a miner activated soft fork, and then the miners refused to play along, and all Bitcoiners looked at each other and said, we're being held hostage by one guy in China? Like, is this really how Bitcoin works? Does Jihan Wu control Bitcoin? Because if so, this is a very bad thing. No, he doesn't. We're going to throw out their blocks. We're going to run this new software as a UASF, a user activated soft fork. And we're going to say, if you don't signal for SegWit, we throw your block in the garbage and you don't get paid. And that was basically what made SegWit happen. There was a face-saving Bitcoin improvement proposal called BIP 91 that gave the miners a way to activate SegWit without losing face. But the story, it's almost like a Henry V story, or one of these stories of a very small band of very dedicated people who basically said, we want this soft fork to happen no matter what. And it was a good soft fork. It gave us Lightning, as I said. And so 500 Bitcoiners out of 100,000 nodes ran this software, basically threatened the miners, and the miners capitulated, because at the end of the day, miners just want to mine blocks and get paid for it. They don't really want to get caught up in politics. In this case, Jihan Wu wanted to keep his ASIC boost advantage, but he ended up losing. And this was really the triumph of the node runners. And this was a very important point in Bitcoin, where we realized that it's the node runners who control the network. The miners, the large mining pools, are just the employees. They don't get to set the rules of the network. What we also learned from this is that minority soft forks are possible in Bitcoin, which is it's a really counterintuitive result. That because in a democracy, you need to get elected president, you need well, it depends if we're talking about the electoral college or the popular vote, but in typical democracy, you need 51% of the vote to win, or more than 50%. Whereas in Bitcoin, this was 0.5% of the nodes, 500 nodes out of 100,000 roughly, 0.5% of the nodes running basically forcing everyone to go along with them. And there was a group that opposed them, but the only way to oppose a minority-led soft fork is you have to do your own counter fork. You have to hard fork away, or do what's called a user resisted or user reactive soft fork. And this is basically what Roger Ver and friends did. So on August 1st, I believe it was August 1st, when SegWit was activated by Luke Dasher and Shaolin Fry and this band of brothers running the BIP 148 UASF, Roger Ver and his friends basically forked off the network. They did a hard fork, and we've had 2 separate chains since then. And Bcash Roger Ver's fork has been a disaster. All the, Bitcoin as we know it today is the small blocker chain. This is the chain that won. That was a chain split that did not heal. But what we learned from that is that the miners don't control the network. So if you're going to do a soft fork, you can give the miners a chance to activate it early, which is what we've done with BIP 110. So for any 2-week period, for any difficulty adjustment period of 2 weeks, which is 2016 blocks, which is roughly 2 weeks, because you have a 10-minute block time. If 55% of the blocks signal for this soft fork, it will activate. It'll activate after 2 weeks. And so that's the period we're in right now. The miners, we've given them the courtesy of activating this soft fork early if they want to make this a very orderly event. And miners just want to get paid. They don't get to decide the rules, especially the large mining pools. And so we're smarter this time around, though. Rather than doing a miner activated soft fork and then realizing, the miners decide not to activate it, what are we going to do now? We have to write a UASF. BIP 110 packages these up into these 2 types of soft fork into one, or these 2 activation methods into a single thing. So between now and call it August 7th, the miners have a chance to activate the soft fork and start running the new software rules. But if they don't do it on approximately August 7th, a certain block height, people like me who are running the software will start to throw miners' blocks in the garbage who are not signaling for this soft fork, and they will not get paid for their blocks. And so then we'll run into a situation, probably most of the miners capitulate before this because again, they just want to get paid. They're not necessarily ideological. They just want to do what the rule makers, the nodes tell them to do. And so, but if the miners do not go along with this, right, when it happens, and I think we haven't had a lot of miners signaling in favor of BIP 110 so far, because this is how these things always work. There's no consequences to not signaling right now. And there's a game theory involved where why would you it's a little bit like you're in a room and you need a volunteer, you're a church or something, they need a volunteer to help with the maintenance next Sunday. And, very few people will be the first one to raise their hand. You need someone who takes the risk. And maybe it's not the best analogy, but people are not going to make decisions unless there's consequences. And so the miners, there's no consequences for them until August 7th. But August 7th, there's going to be, their blocks are going to start getting thrown in the garbage. And we're basically going to activate this whether the miners want to or not. And we have this precedent in Bitcoin with SegWit, which I just summarized, that minority soft forks are possible in Bitcoin. You don't need a majority to change the rules. And it's the reason this seems sort of counterintuitive. How could we change the network without everyone going along with it? It only works for soft forks because soft forks narrow the rules. And so the rules that we're going to be enforcing are a subset of the existing rules. Whereas what Roger Ver was trying to do, he was expanding the rules. It was a hard fork. And when you expand the rules, you need to get node runners, everyone to upgrade their nodes to the new software. Whereas when you're contracting the rules or narrowing the rules as you do in a soft fork, you do not need to get everyone to upgrade their software because the legacy nodes, even the Bitcoin core nodes, will recognize our blocks as valid because they're just going to have smaller op returns. They're going to be, and they're not going to have the inscriptions exploit. So it's a subset. And this is also, there's really no one who's against this either because it's very reasonable. It's returning Bitcoin to where it was in 2022 or early 2023. It's not adding new bells and whistles. It's not adding new functionality. It's contracting the attack surface rather than expanding it like Bitcoin Core has done. And so the only way to resist something like this, a minority soft fork, the only way you can resist it is you have to run a counter fork. And so then the Bitcoin network and the Bitcoin community today are comprised of, they're basically three groups. There's the BIP 110, Bitcoin Knots people like me who understand what a threat to the network Bitcoin Core has become. And so we want to run the soft fork. And then you have the majority. So we're currently at about 13% of the network. 13% of the network is RDTS nodes. Then most of the community is clueless, ambivalent, doesn't care, playing around with Bitcoin treasury companies, doing whatever. And they're either unaware of us or they just don't care either way. And then you have maybe like 10 guys on Twitter who are against us. And so the only way to stop our soft fork is if those 10 guys create a client, a UASF client, and try to create a counter fork. And so we can game this out. What would be their sales proposition? These guys who want to do a UASF and basically counter fork against us the same way Roger Ver did against the small blockers. Their ad would be, come run our UASF. It's got really big op returns where people can stick CSAM. It's the spam chain. It's hard to, and plus they're just a few loud voices on Twitter. They don't really have organic followings. And so this is one reason I think this soft fork will succeed, because the only way you can stop a minority soft fork is by opposing it. And the important thing to notice as well is that I think it's important that the Bitcoin network and Bitcoiners become familiar with this, because while BIP 110 is a very conservative soft fork, it just closes these gaping attack surfaces, and it does it just for a year. It expires after 12 months. So after 12 months, all the rules will expire. We'll be back to where we are. And this gives us time to basically come together as a community and come up with a permanent solution. But we try to make this fork just as conservative and easy as possible. Like if you like Bitcoin in 2022 and you hate CSAM and you don't want your node to be full of garbage and spam, then you should run this. The only, so what I was going to say is that when you hear this idea that a small minority can change Bitcoin, that minority soft forks are available, are possible, and this is exactly what happened in 2017. Just 500 people did this. This makes you realize that Bitcoiners need to be prepared for hostile minority soft forks. So while ours is very transparent, it's very benevolent, all it does is close these attack surfaces. It doesn't hurt Bitcoiners' money at all. It grandfathers in UTXOs. No one's going to have their money confiscated or lost. It's very, very conservative. We could at some point have a small group, a minority, that tries to do a minority soft fork that's bad for Bitcoin. BIP 110 makes Bitcoin better money, restores it to where it was in 2022. But if someone comes through and tries to do a minority soft fork that makes Bitcoin worse money, it's very important to know that we node runners. And again, if you're not running a node, sorry, you're not part of this conversation. That's why all Bitcoiners should run a node, because it's taking back the power and being a self-sovereign individual. But in the future, if there's a hostile minority soft fork, we will all get together and we will do a UASF, and we will fight them in that way. But what makes BIP 110 very unusual is we have no real opposition. We have miners who don't really care, who are just like, tell us the rules. We don't want network disruption. We have exchanges like Coinbase, just tell us the rules. We'll just go with the longest chain. And then we have some noisy people on Twitter who say they hate spam, but they're unwilling to do anything about it. Some of them have worked for spam companies. There are a lot of very strange, possibly compromised individuals. And so in summary, this is how the Bitcoin network defends itself through node runners. It's not magical. It's not like through its atomic properties like gold. The Bitcoin network is very dynamic. It's comprised of high agency individuals like you and me, low time preference, high agency, people who love freedom, and who are willing to protect the network against people who just want to spam on it and do their shitcoin scams on it. And so I think it's a very interesting time to be alive, because we're going to learn throughout this. We're going to see that minority soft forks are possible, because BIP 110 is going to be activated, maybe by the miners early, but definitely by the rest of us at that point. And I think the other thing to point out is that another reason I think it's going to be activated is that we plebs who are running it, we have a very high tolerance for chaos. So for example, my Bitcoin is in cold storage. It's not leveraged. I haven't taken out any loans against it. I really don't care if Bitcoin goes to 5,000 or if it goes to 1,000, or if we have a chain split that makes it impossible to transact for a couple of days, if we have real chaos. And again, if this happens, this will be because the miners are either malicious or they're not paying attention. If they all start mining, we'll be fine. But what this, if you think about the miners who are spending millions of dollars a day in electricity, the exchanges like Coinbase, they just want stability in the network. They're not like us crazy plebs who are basically have the. I think I've heard Bitcoin Mechanic use the grenade metaphor. Like we're just crazy enough to walk into the room and to be like, look, Bitcoin is money. This means this is so important to me. I've got a grenade here, and I'm willing to blow all of us up if you don't go along with us. And so we don't have an opposition. No one has the hand grenade that says, I want spam and CSAM on Bitcoin. And if there were a group that was trying to push that through, then I would definitely URSF them, because that's unacceptable. But I think it's a very exciting time to be in Bitcoin. We're seeing Bitcoin heal itself, fight back against Bitcoin Core, rat around the spammers and scammers. And unfortunately, this all could have been avoided. Like Bitcoin Core, if they weren't so stubborn or corrupted, all they need to do is like fix the inscriptions exploit and bring operaturn back to 80 bytes, where it's been since 2015. Like that's not a radical thing to ask. If they just done that, if they could do that tomorrow, and it would really take the wind out of our sails, I can tell you. I would probably have second thoughts about the soft fork. But instead, they are so stubborn or stupid or malicious or compromised that they're willing to disrupt the entire network over their silly little changes, which have opened the network up to just horrendous things like CSAM. So it's great to see in the BIP 110 movement. It's mostly it seems to be mostly like men with families, who own Bitcoin, who take it very seriously, not like the Bitcoin Core devs who who get paid in fiat and don't really own a lot of Bitcoin, especially the younger ones, and don't run nodes. This is like real Bitcoiners, hardcore Bitcoiners who run nodes, who want to protect their life savings and want Bitcoin to be around for their children. Whereas a lot of Bitcoin core devs, it's a certain demographic that just doesn't even have children. So those are basically the battle lines. And I think BIP 110 is the right thing to do. This has been a 3-year escalation where we've tried to do everything we could. We tried to have the inscriptions exploit patched in 2023. We argued with Bitcoin cores that don't blow open op return. They did it anyway. So we deserted them. We dumped our Bitcoin core nodes and started running Bitcoin knots. 25% of the network left them. They're still stubborn. They're not making any changes. They still want to push through. And there's a chance that they're gonna keep doing this if they can get away with it. And so there's been this slow escalation from pressure at the social level to pressure at the mempool level to dumping Bitcoin core and running Bitcoin knots. And we're now at the soft fork level. And it's a very conservative soft fork. It's temporary, etc. But basically, this is it's just like you have to do with crime. If you live in a stable, sane society, you just have people teach their kids like you don't shoplift, you don't steal stuff. And why do you do that? It's just because if you have a store, dad has a store, he doesn't want people stealing from him. Like, this is just how humans need to live together. And so this is, I think I lost where I was going with that thought, but I know what I was going to say, that the escalation it's very similar to crime. If you don't show hostility to crime, if you're just very wishy-washy about it and you say, it's okay because these people have had hard lives or their past social injustices or whatever, those things may be very true, but you can't live in a functioning society. Like, I don't like going to the drugstore and buying razor blades and having to get a clerk to unlock it for a $10 razor. That's not the kind of society you want to live in. And so the way you avoid that is you don't have to put people you don't have to have capital punishment and have the death penalty for people who steal razor blades from a store, but you have to show hostility to crime, and you arrest people who steal things, and then you have to be willing to escalate it. If someone just keeps coming in your store and robbing you, they need to go to jail. And if they get out of jail and do it again, you put them in jail for longer. And the great thing is you don't actually have to hurt these people, because if you show that you have teeth and that you're tough on crime and that you're not willing to be all postmodern and woke about it, then these people won't commit crimes because they don't want to go to jail. They don't want to go to jail for 10 years for some razor blades. And so this is BIP 110 is the last step, or it's the next step. We could actually do even more severe things, but this is basically saying we're going to take back the Bitcoin network. We're going to revert the damage that Bitcoin Core did. And we're going to proclaim to the world that Bitcoin is a monetary network. Bitcoin is money, and that's what it needs to be used for, which is seems like hardly a controversial hill to be willing to, to have to die on. Like, if Bitcoiners can't agree that Bitcoin is money, and if we're going to let malicious miners decide the rules of the network, then that's basically a 51% attack that we're in. And Satoshi himself said in the white paper, the Nakamoto consensus system cannot function if 51% of the miners are malicious and hostile. And so we're going to find out. We're going to find out in a couple months. Are the miners just stupid and slow and just focused on mining blocks, or is there something malicious going on? In which case, they will need to be fired as well, because we can't have malicious miners who are going to be willing to cooperate with governments. In 2028, we could have the U.S. federal government tell these large Bitcoin mining pools, American Bitcoin mining pools, oh, you can't mine OFAC non-compliant transactions, or you can't mine transactions from Iran or North Korea or wherever, Venezuela, whoever's the American enemy at that point, just whatever the made-up enemy is. And so we need to have Bitcoin miners who follow the Bitcoin nodes and do what we tell them to do. So that's basically what the soft fork is about.
It's interesting how you frame it as, firing the miners so that they, taking that step further, is like, we want them to do the work. We're going to hire people that would do the work we want them to do in a way that's respectable and keeps the commons clean. You mentioned sort of escalating it.
Actually, before you go to that, so the term, let me just flesh it out, because when I said fire the miners, I was alluding to something that's very, very controversial, that that not everyone may have picked up on. What the ultimate way you can get rid of the miners, if they're truly malicious, and I don't think it's going to come to that this year, but it's important that Bitcoiners understand this. And this is like the death penalty. Like, it's important that you have it there, even if you don't use it, because it really does put the fear of God into people. The ultimate way to fire the miners is to change the proof of work algorithm from SHA-256. And so if node runners were to change SHA-256, it would brick all of the machines. It would instantly put all the miners and the hashers and the people who own these machines out of business overnight. And their machines would be worthless, because a machine that does SHA-256, it's not good for anything else. You could mine BSV or Bcash or one of these shit coins on it. But basically, that's the ultimate threat. And it's like it's a little bit like the nuclear bomb. Like, we're never, we don't want to use this because it's probably going to hurt us too. But we have a nuke. And we have a nuke. And so changing SHA-256, changing proof of work, that's the ultimate way to fire the miners. And that at some point in Bitcoin, I don't think it's going to happen this year, but some point down the 10 years from now, we might need to actually do that if the miners are malicious, because we can't have a network with malicious miners. So I just wanted to fill in that illusion for you.
Well, yeah. So I want to kind of cover, some ways you've kind of framed this up, maybe in other places, but Bit 110, I've heard you call sort of like a prophylactic. And so, it's sort of, I guess here it delays pregnancy, but you can still get pregnant in the future. It's temporary. And we do live in a high trust society. You, as Bitcoiners, don't trust verify, but I can go into a car dealership and it's highly regulated, but I could walk out of there with a car worth a few tens of thousands of dollars very quickly and coordinate with a lot of parties, and settlement isn't final.
Or like a rental car. It used to amaze me when I was younger that I would just give them a credit card and I could drive a $50,000 car but obviously, there are repercussions if you do something bad with that car.
Sure. But it's all based on trust to some extent.
That's true.
And, you can go into a liquor store and the guy's behind glass and, I had an offline conversation with a frat once. I don't think I'm going to fringe on it here, but the idea of what makes you feel safer. Are you actually safer? And, I walk into that store and I'm like, he's safer, but I don't feel safe. I don't know if I feel safe in the neighborhood anymore.
Yeah.
I just don't want to shop in that environment. And it's high trust being able to go in the store and not have glass between us. I like how you kind of say, this temporary Bit 110 for a year, it scares the spammers and scammers away. And why that's important culturally is it's hard to build somewhere where you're not allowed or not accepted. And you even mentioned this around the touchy subject of CSAM. It's like you could want to put CSAM on the blockchain. You could find ways, or the time chain, to sneak it on there. But it's hard to build a project or get any sort of reputation awareness or any investment if you don't tell people that you're doing that.
Really good point.
And drum up the interest. So it's like you delay for a year, but it sort of delays growing seeds, planting seeds for several years maybe.
And just the idea of this soft fork, even just putting out this podcast, this is going to scare, and all the actions we've taken leading up to this, people dumping core for knots. If you're a crypto VC and you're thinking about funding a Bitcoin spam company that's going to put NFTs on Bitcoin, or that's going to put it on Solana or Ethereum or one of the more tolerant chains, just seeing the Bitcoin community, all the furor on Twitter and everyone dumping core for knots, this we've already driven away spammers and scammers, because why would you fund something? It's the same thing. If there's a community, if there's a neighborhood that's got neighborhood watch and everyone is heavily armed in their houses, why in the world would you rob that neighborhood? You might as well go to a neighborhood where they don't, they're not scaring away criminals. So just the very fact of talking about these soft forks has actually, I'm sure it's already prevented a lot of spam. And it's kind of a counterintuitive thing. It's a little bit like, it's like we were talking about prophylaxis or contraception. It's like, I think Mechanic or someone maybe Marcellus has used the same analogy. If contraception works, I don't think contraception works because we're all the babies who are prevented. And we all understand, like, you can't measure things that didn't happen in the same way. If you have an NRA sign in front of your house and whatever, that you did probably drive away some people who decide not to break into your house. Or if you have a fence, it's like, why is no one ever climbing my fence? Well, because it's a fence. And so they go to my neighbor's house instead. So there's this measurement problem and the survivorship bias problem that a lot of people miss in a very naive way. So just even putting out a podcast like this, there will be a crypto VC who watches this and realizes how pissed a lot of us are, and he's not gonna
We'll
build.
filter him out. We won't let him watch. But I think you've mentioned there's like 50% of the time chain blockchain. I kind of want to move away from blockchain because I just think it has unfortunately for us, it has a negative connotation with crypto. But there are some estimates that there's like 40 to 60% of spam already on the blockchain. And there was a moment, I think, during sort of the filter wars where Adam Beck, I think, even came out with a really, I think, material, maybe olive branch, and said, hey, why don't we go from 80 kilobytes to 160? Let's
Bytes. 80 bytes to
160 bytes. 180 bytes to 160. We can enlarge this a little bit, see what happens. Maybe we get a new use case. But let's not open the barn door, to 100,000 bytes, which is absurd.
Yeah.
And but what could we be missing? The way you frame it, and I like it. It sounds good. It sounds reasonable. It sounds logical. You see the game theory. We're going to clean up the chain, even if it's temporarily, and we're going to be the longest chain. But is there something we could be missing? Are Bitcoiners who adopt BIP 110 maybe putting coins at stake that they don't understand in some way?
No, I don't think so, because there's an actual rule to the soft fork that grandfathers in all chunks of Bitcoin or UTXOs that were created before the fork activates.
And what about a new chain? If more proof of work goes to a new chain, if people make non-economic decisions that somehow don't hold up to us the way we think actors would logically act.
Well, I would suspect that the legacy chain, the CSAM chain too, that would be the side that you would expect the intel agencies and the deep state to be wanting to win. And unfortunately, that's the chain we're sitting on right today.
So could Mara come out? And I know it's not a conversation. It's like a good way of defining things. There are hashers and there are miners. And I'm not saying Marathon is a hasher, but I'm not saying Marathon is a miner. They're hashing. They're renting.
They're actually both. Marathon.
Yeah, that's true. They're both. But
they build their own blocks too. So
right.
they're a weird exception.
Right. But whether it's Marathon or not, but let's say someone makes a decision that just does not sound economically rational and says, we love op return. We don't care if C-spam or anything ends up in there. We like this chain and we're 30% of the proof of work and there's only 5 mining pools and et cetera, et cetera. Is there some sort of, blind corner that we're not seeing around?
Well, in that case, first of all, it's even hard to steel man that side, because we know these large regulated pools have lawyers, and we don't want to depend on the legal system. This isn't about suing anyone, but you can imagine the discussion with the corporate lawyers at Foundry. Should we mine on the chain that doesn't have CSAM or the chain that does have CSAM? It's a non-brainer. It's a no-brainer for a family. It's a no-brainer for a corporation. Why even have that risk? And especially the CSAM chain can be wiped out by the BIP 110 chain. And so this is the thing, if we end up with a chain split, the BIP 110 chain is never going to go away. We can just keep waiting there. And people there's a weird game theory where you want to come over to our chain first, because the sooner you come over to our chain, the smaller the chance that your work gets wiped out. You don't want to be the last person off the CSAM chain or off the CSAM boat coming over. But in terms of stuff that we might be missing, this has been the strange thing about the argument, that everyone says they're against spam, and obviously everyone's against CSAM. There aren't good arguments on the other side. The argument, they say they'll basically create straw men and say, well, it doesn't stop spam. And it's well, it says in the BIP that it doesn't stop spam. This is a straw man. You're attacking it for not doing something that it says it doesn't do. Or it's going to confiscate people's Bitcoin, but it's not going to confiscate people's Bitcoin, because you can, every transaction or every UTXO that's created before that block height is grandfathered in. Then you do have some bad actors who have created these very intricate constructions using Taproot and many deep. I'm going to say this wrong, but deep leaves, and they've done it in sort of an obstructionist way. And it's a little bit like the guy who runs out into the middle of the highway and, tries to get in front of a bus and says, "Stop the bus." And then the bus hits him and he's like, why did you hit me? It's like, well, this is a highway. If you want to make changes, you don't run out. And so we do have a couple people, and actually Greg Maxwell has said online that, he has some transaction that's going to be hurt by the soft fork. And it looks to me, at least, that he's done this sort of one-off weird transaction that it's like running in front of the bus and then being like, why are you driving your bus? You're going to hit me. And so no real Bitcoin uses will be affected by this. Lightning won't be affected. People using single sig or multi-sig or even regular Taproot Bitcoin addresses, you'll still be able to use those. You just won't be able to use the op-if in the op-if opcode in the input for the transaction. So there don't seem to be good arguments against it. There's no, and it makes sense that this is why there's no UASF opposing us. So there'll be people who oppose us and they'll say, I hate spam too. And then we're like, well, why are you opposing us? And they're like, well, because you shouldn't be able to, a minority shouldn't be able to impose their will on the network. And then we're like, well, this is what happened with SegWit. And the change we're trying to push through is very benevolent. We're just trying to stop these things. And so then they'll be like, well, it's so inorganic. Then on our side, we have thousands and thousands of plebs who have started running nodes who understand, like, it's not complex computer science theory.
It's kind of like they're like, why are you fighting for what you believe in?
That's
why
what
are
it
you
is.
not being an asshole? Why don't you allow the assholes to hang out with us? It reminds me a little bit.
It's like peeing in the pool, like we were talking about. It's like,
so there's that I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just saying it's like the peeing in the pool.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
That antisocial behavior. So I understood this at a young age. You walking down the hallways in high school, and some kid's like, "Hey, you fucking asshole."
Yeah, I don't like your shirt.
And you're like, "Shut up, dick." And he's like, "Did you call me a dick?"
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to fight now.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Are you overlooking how you just called me an asshole?" And
it's like, why is there all this hostility from the soft fork? It's like, well, because the reference implementation went rogue and the network's now open to CSAM and no one seems to want to do anything about this. Like, it's like taking crazy pills again.
Yeah, well, we'll see how it goes. It seems like it's going to be a hot summer. I think that in a weird way, price is really related to this.
Yeah.
And
Bitcoin's in a very bad place right now. And
that brings a lot of uncertainty. And I believe, for me, uneasiness.
Me too.
It seems logical, but and you don't want to end up in a situation where the thing ends up in a place where you're like, I can't stand behind this.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what I thought it was, or it's I don't think it's going that way. I think this is the battle towards preventing that.
Everything's moving in the right direction to heal. So people are running knots and people are supporting the soft fork. That's the good news. And that's, people ask me like, why haven't you left the space, or why haven't you sold your Bitcoin? It's because I'm just amazed by, all the just the regular Bitcoin plebs coming through on this one, and people who've never run nodes before, people taking this really, really seriously. And that's very encouraging. That shows Bitcoin's immune system is still alive. And if Bitcoin's immune system is still alive, and we have people defending the network who actually own Bitcoin and care about it, who aren't working for spam companies that want to profit from scams, then Bitcoin's in a good place. And I think things could get turbulent this summer. But I think it was Winston Churchill who said that Americans always do the right thing after exhausting all the other options. I think Bitcoiners will this is a similar situation. Bitcoiners will do the right thing after the last very frustrating 12 months. But this is definitely the best option at this point. Again, unless Bitcoin Core, it would take a hit to their ego or whatever, but they can also fix things by just reverting all those changes. I think that'd probably derail this soft fork. It's hard to say, but
it seems like you're putting it all on the line, making this sort of, and even reputationally, I think, if this,
yeah.
in the Bitcoin world,
this is the last. People should understand this. This is the last stand. That if BIP 110 fails, this is really bad for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is then on the path where basically the miners can say how it's supposed to be, the large mining pools, and that Bitcoin Core gets to make up the rules for the network. And there are a lot of Bitcoin affinity scams like Shitria, which we talked about, who are preparing to put loads and loads of data on the blockchain for all their stupid tokens and things that don't even scale Bitcoin. And so if you want to understand what the failure case looks like here, you can just look at Ethereum. Just a complete disaster. No one runs an Ethereum node. There's no pleb you can talk to. It runs a full archival Ethereum node, and they don't even understand what one is. Bitcoin is the only. I shouldn't call it a cryptocurrency, but it's the only cryptocurrency that
it is the only cryptocurrency. Period. I think that's
it's the only one that has plebs running nodes,
and
you can't recreate them. Yeah. Well, that's why it's decentralized. That's why it's decentralized. And so the reason I put everything on the line for this, and I'm also, we didn't talk about it, but I'm also mining. A lot of us are renting hash rate and using it to signal for this. So we're actually spending money out of our own pockets, Bitcoin out of our own pockets from our cold storage to try to help get miners to signal and to mine BIP 110 signaling blocks. Because if we fail on this, it's, Bitcoin's not going to die. That's not what there's always people in Bitcoin saying, do what I say or Bitcoin's going to die. But we're just the trend is in the wrong direction, where we've had more and more spam, more and more Bitcoin affinity scams. People are distracted. They think you should buy Bitcoin treasury stocks. This is just, if BIP 110 fails, which to be very clear, I don't think it's going to fail. But if it does, that's just another of these 1,000 cuts to Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is not physical gold. You can kill Bitcoin. If Bitcoiners decide they want to be Ethereum, Bitcoin will become Ethereum, or Bitherium, as people like to joke. And there's nothing to stop it. If Bitcoin node runners want Bitcoin to become Ethereum, it will become Ethereum, and that will be really bad. And so we know that Ethereum really has no value. It's a disaster. No one runs nodes. And so I would hope that people could think at least 3 or 4 steps ahead and see where we're headed, and just the hostility and the compromise at Bitcoin Core, the mining pool centralization, and these various problems. That this is a very essential soft fork, and people will look back on it after we're successful, just like they were for SegWit. There's so many people now who take credit for SegWit and have these alternate histories and say, I was there fighting for it. And I've talked to the guys who are actually there fighting for it, like Mechanic and Luke Dasher, and they're like, those people were just sitting on the sidelines waiting to join the winners. And this is how it always is. This was the American Revolution. There are people who are willing to get up and take arms for what they believe in. And then there are the people who will come afterwards and take credit for it. And that's fine. We want to extend bridges. We're all Bitcoin brothers and sisters. But it really is the minority that makes history, that's willing to speak up and put their reputations and put their money on the line. And it worked with SegWit. It basically saved Bitcoin that way. And it's going to work again. And we have Mechanic and Luke Dasher. We're in the last UASF. So we have precedent, and we've got a good Bitcoin army of plebs that's going to push this thing through.
Yeah, I love that. Bob Burnett and I are working on a stealth mode startup.
Oh, nice! I love Bob.
Do solo mining at home, not through sharing a pool, but sort of solo style, like a BitAxe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you've mentioned it. The advice you'd give is run a node, mine with your node, and understand the spam wars.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. And
just take full control. Take full control as a Bitcoiner. Like, you have to understand Bitcoin in cold storage, not your keys, not your coins. Run a Bitcoin node, use it to make transactions, use it to build blocks, and mine with it. And I'll put in a small plug here. It's a free plug, bitcoinuniversity.com/mining. It's on my website, but you don't need to put your email in. There's no paywall or anything. It's actually just a copy of the same tutorial that's on YouTube. So you can find it on YouTube as well, how to mine Bitcoin from home. But I put it on that URL so I can shell it on podcasts like this. So if you want to learn how to mine Bitcoin from home and do it with rented hash, you don't need to buy machines in this case. And you can mine. I'm mining at 5 petahash right now, 4,000 or 5,000 BitX equivalent, and it doesn't cost that much. You make most of the money back. So I would just encourage Bitcoiners, get your hands dirty, really learn how to use Bitcoin the way Satoshi intended, where you have the whole stack and you're completely independent on it. But I'm sorry I interrupted you in the middle.
No worries. I mean, I love what you just said. Being a Bitcoiner is not being on X. It's not telling your friends to buy the Bitcoin ETF. It's running a node.
Yeah.
And when you start mining from home, even with rented hash power, you're doing the same thing the pools do. You're picking the blocks, the transactions. Yeah. You're renting hash power like anyone else could and deploying it the way you want to. You get to vote for BIP 110 if you want to. I'm not telling you what to do.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. You get to decide, and you don't have other miners deciding for you.
Yep. And you get to spit out with your filters transactions you don't want to process up front. They might come into your node through the back door, but you don't have to propagate them to start. And something very interesting that's sort of the icing on the cake here, which might be the real win, is let's say your example, you spend $200 in fiat or Bitcoin, right? It could be denominated in fiat, but you send it in Bitcoin if you want.
Yeah.
And you spend $200, you get 4,000 to 5,000 equivalents of BitX in pentahash. And then you receive, let's call it $190 in Bitcoin or fiat. Well, it's Bitcoin in this case. So you're losing $10 in fiat denominated terms, but you're getting KYC free sats back.
That's the secret we don't talk about too much.
Clean sats,
very exciting,
and KYC free. And I recommend to any Bitcoiner, if you have some sats, have some portion of your sats that are KYC free for different threat vectors and scenarios that you might come to see in the world.
Yeah, Bitcoin miners, you get paid when you mine in the way that I talk about in the tutorial. You get virgin Bitcoin. It's from the Coinbase. And when you get it, you'll learn about Bitcoin's rules. Because when I first got some of it, I wanted to send it back to Brains to buy more hash power. And for some reason, my wallet would not let me send it. And I tried again and again. And then I realized, there is 100 block delay before I can spend it. So it was really cool to know, like, I'm a Bitcoin miner now. And this protocol, I've read about this in books, but it is very real. And I have to wait 100 blocks before I can spend my reward. So just running a node and mining with it, you'll learn so much about Bitcoin, like crazy stuff that you've read about in textbooks. But when you experience it yourself, it's so exciting.
It's funny in a way, like that could be the one. I could see a minority group wanting to change the 100 block rule. Who is the Bitcoin network to tell me I can't move my coins? Sats before I want to.
I was mad at first, and then I realized it's there for a reason.
Yeah, well, it's Satoshi's idea, and it may or may not be a good one. That's for you to decide. I've enjoyed this conversation tremendously. It's been really dope. I have two questions for you. One, is there any question that no one asked you that you wish someone would?
There probably is, but I can't think of it right now.
I got a little bit of the brain rot myself at this point. It's like a little bit of like a wet.
That's I appreciate you asking the question though. It's
the other one. I'll just bring it up. The name. I mean, you've come across a lot of interesting people in your life. I don't think saying someone's like Forrest Gump is a compliment, but Forrest Gump did meet a lot of people in his life. So kind of like the Forrest Gump of Bitcoin a little bit. You were college roommates, I guess, with Kevin Warsh.
Yeah.
It's another one like. For me, Peter Thiel, from what I've heard you speak about him, I mean, he came from sort of a wealthy background. Didn't sound
no, he didn't come from a wealthy background.
Oh, I thought he did come from like a Beverly Hills type.
Kevin Warsh did.
Kevin Warsh, yeah.
Yeah, not I'm sorry. I thought you were saying Peter Thiel did.
No, but Kevin came from a little bit of a wealthy background, but seems like a smart guy. I could see why that job is extremely exciting or you get the money on the pulse of the cost of money in the world. It's almost like being Joseph in the stories about the Pharaoh and in Egypt and explaining how bread works. And we feast when, sort of helping out the Pharaoh and being the whisperer, the money whisperer.
Yeah.
And Greenspan for a long time was the most respected person in the world. And, he thought that this person was like, fiat could be evil, it could be bad, but this person's the benefit, he's here to help.
He's like the Wizard of Oz, he's behind the curtain. But
I can't help but be conspiratorial about finding out who he's married to and sort of how we think power structures might work. So I don't know if you have any just thoughts there. It didn't seem like you knew him very well. I mean, like my college
for
roommate
Kevin
was smart.
Warsh.
Yeah, my
Yeah,
college
so I
roommate was
was.
very smart, but I could probably get them in a lot of trouble with
Yeah, he was
stories. You know.
just a good guy. He was Stanford had suffered from the Loma Prieta earthquake, so there was a housing shortage. So it was basically there was a lottery for housing, and my friend group got split up as a result of that lottery. So I was basically rooming with, I can't remember if it was 4 or 5 other guys, but Kevin Warsh and basically his friend group were part of it. So I didn't hang out with them that much. I was mostly out and about. But Kevin was a very smart guy, great guy, and it's totally surreal to meet someone like that. And then I was sort of following his path, and I remember joking with Peter Thiel actually in 2004. So we were joking because we both knew Kevin. Like, what if he becomes or whenever, I guess he was nominated by Bush in maybe it was 2005 or so, but around then it's like, wow, he could actually become chairman someday. Wouldn't that be crazy? I'm sure Peter's still in contact with him, so he's
reconnected.
Yeah, or reconnected. But I only have good things to say about Kevin. Sad thing is he became a central banker. You know, what a waste of talent. But he was always nice to me. And
I mean, if you're going to stay in fiat land, I mean, that's probably the ultimate job. And
yeah, it is. It is.
A lot of people don't envy it, but some people, really can handle being maybe or desire being in the positions other people, the majority says, we can't handle that. I would never want that job. I remember there was, when Bill Clinton was leaving office, what are you going to do? He said, well, maybe I'll try to run for mayor of New York City and try to get the hardest job in the country.
Yeah.
Almost like sort of being humble about the presidency and stuff. But
well, that's the funny thing about being a central banker, though. We say it's, in many ways, it is a more powerful job than, even being the president. But there's a reverse way of looking at that, where he basically, his hands are completely tied by the markets. So he paradoxically has a lot of power and prestige, but basically when the treasury market starts going into dysfunction, he has to print. And so it's almost like he's just he's floating down the river with the rest of us. He doesn't have that much power. He'll just try to keep rates as high as possible. And then if something breaks, he has to immediately lower them and start printing money. So maybe the job's not that. I find that not actually that interesting. But if you like hobnobbing with, powerful politicians and flying around on private jets, which I think he could do already, but if I had that, I would. He should be focused on Bitcoin, probably.
That's what makes it interesting. Obviously, it's like survivor bias and sort of like with spam. We know who said yes. We don't know who said no.
Yeah.
And,
that's true.
It's very interesting. Like a lot of people presume they would say no, or, but you're not.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
And then it's sort of like, well, what, sort of the Peter Thiel thing. It's like, well, if I say no, what else could I do that would be that complex? And even if, as with most things, even being CEO of a company, it's like, well, you think you have all this freedom? No, you have to go out there and sell. Yeah. You have to toe the company line. You have to say that you believe these things, even if you don't.
Very true.
They all have sort of limiting
factors.
factors.
Kind of a paradox of power, that the higher you rise, maybe the less power you have, or certainly the less self-sovereignty.
Yeah. I mean, the dream for most seems to, I shouldn't say for most, but some is like walk away from it all when you have enough.
Yeah.
And
very hard to do. Most people don't do it. They want that.
I'll leave it to you for any parting words. Let people know where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, thank you, Cedric. You're such a good interviewer, and it's so fun to be on it's always surreal to have watched a pod and then to be on it. So I thank you for the opportunity. You can find me on YouTube. I have a channel called Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. You can just type Bitcoin University into YouTube. I'm at Matt Kratter, MattKratter on X. And then be sure to check out that bitcoinuniversity.com/mining link. I'd like to get just as many Bitcoiners, even Bitcoiners who don't support the soft fork, just get as many Bitcoiners getting their hands dirty, running nodes and mining with them. I think this is really what Bitcoin needs at this point. So I want to onboard as many newcomers to that as possible. And you can spend just a couple bucks a day mining too, or just experiment with it. Throw $10 towards it, see what happens. And I think if you do that, you'll actually get hooked. It's very cool. It's the first thing I check in the morning. I don't check Bitcoin's price at all. I haven't really done that in years, but I do check. I check my Bitcoin mining address that's receiving the rewards, and I go on Ocean and look when the last block was mined and look inside the block. And so it's its own world that I think more Bitcoiners deserve to experience. So that'd be my parting words.
Yeah, I got a little BitX behind me, or Nerd Miner. That's my Nerd Miner.
Oh, nice.
I like that one. I do a small amount of mining through.
You can do both. I love the BitX, and I love these home projects. So I have a couple BitXs as well, but do the BitX and then also do rented hash. Like they're not mutually exclusive.
Just doing a small mining project helped me sort of think about Bitcoining from a mining perspective, which is very different from as
very different, yeah.
And a user and a spender, and it made me realize how brutal that industry is to make profits.
It's really hard, yeah.
And
people like Bob Burnett, they're doing it the right way. These kind of wild horse miners in the middle of nowhere, just
off grid even.
I hear about it.
Yeah, I got to go to one of Bob's off grid sites with dam mining, mining from a dam.
Oh,
and,
really?
I'll tell you a little bit about that offline. But the solo mining is fun because it's a little more lottery style, and it's not so steady Eddie.
BitX, you can earn. I mean, if you find a block solo mining, we should tell people 3.125 Bitcoin. So I don't know where Bitcoin is right now, but call it $200,000.
Very exciting.
$100 BitX, and that's why we call it lottery mining, obviously, because probably not going to happen, but it has happened to some Bitcoin solo miners. I mean,
we've seen it recently. So.
Yeah.
All right, hang on tight. We'll chat a little bit after the show.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Hey, and that's a wrap on this one. If this conversation added value, share it with one person who needs to hear it. That is how the Bitcoin Matrix, where critical thinkers meet, grows. Huge thanks to our sponsors, Stampseed, Firefish, Club Orange, and Camp Nakamoto. These are companies and products I personally use and believe in. Please support them so they can keep supporting the show. Links and codes for all of them are in the show notes. Not on Fountain yet? $5 a month gets you every episode a full day early, completely ad-free, or $1 per episode after early access. Follow me on X. I'm at Sed Youngelman. The show is at _Bitcoin Matrix. We're in the conversation every single day. The Matrix is real. Keep on stacking. Keep your head on a swivel. Spend your time well. And thank you for listening.